Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes all of the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstance of each hearing. Next on the agenda, we have minutes, but we don't have any minutes, so we'll skip over that. And I will just say that first before the hearing, we're going to have a work session that will last about an hour. So I wanted to make sure that all of you in the audience are aware of that. Thanks for coming. Let's go for information items now, if you have any.
I don't have any information items other than to say it looks like we're going to have a council quorum present. So I'm expecting Lisa Beatty soon. So I think perhaps the council members should join us at these three seats up here so that when Lisa arrives, we've got a quorum and they can acknowledge that.
Okay. Great. All right. So next on the agenda is audience participation, and this is an opportunity for the public to comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay. Okay, why don't you come on up and you can state your name for the record? Yes, please. Yes. Thank you.
My name is Cindy Cole.
And can you give your address, please, for the record?
4316 Southeast Washington. I'm just wondering about, I looked on the website recently trying to find some updates on the bike trail issues, and I could not find anything. I called the offices and got a few names and numbers I was told to call. I called those names and numbers and no one's ever responded. So I don't know. I want to know where that stands and what's going on. The stuff on the website seemed very, it was hard to tell what was recent and what wasn't, because there's frequently people don't put notes on the stuff that's like in the list of what's going on. And the dates need to be on those things.
Okay, so you're asking about the status of a bike trail?
Yes. Is that going to happen? Is it not going to happen? What's going on with it? I haven't heard anything.
I'm not familiar with.
Is there a particular bike trail you are referring?
The one that's going along the apartments we're talking about here, right behind the marketplace.
Oh.
The Monroe Greenway.
What?
The Monroe Greenway is what
That's
that's,
what it's called? Okay.
yeah.
Yes, I'm just wanting to know a status on it because no one's been able to get back to me or anything.
Okay.
I can provide a little bit of information about it. The city is currently in the process of applying for a grant to get funding to help pay for that bike improvement. It's called the Monroe Neighborhood Greenway, and it extends from the east end of the city down through central Milwaukee and then along Monroe down to downtown.
Right.
It'll probably happen in phases. The money won't all come at one time.
No.
This
is not.
And even if we were to get the grant right away, it would still take a couple of years to start any one of those segments. There is a Public Safety Advisory Committee meeting Thursday night where there is going to be a presentation by a couple of staff members that are going to talk about the status of the project. And that's kind of what I know at this point.
Is that to the public, for the public?
No, yeah, sure. Mhm.
What time?
If you go on the website and
Yeah.
go on the city website, there is a column, and you go to public meetings. If you do the drop-down menu and go to public meetings, you will see Public Safety Advisory Committee listed on Thursday. So that will give you some information about where and what time.
Okay.
It's also on your pilot city calendar too, so.
On the pilot?
Yeah, and so there's a if you don't have your pilot at home, there is a pilot that's downstairs and standing up there right by the entrance. So you can look and they can give you the location there as well.
But we've got an adopted plan, and we're now trying to find funding to implement that plan.
I'm just interested in finding what the plan is, because some of the stuff I've been told doesn't make a lot of sense to me, so.
Okay, well, the other thing you can do is, I don't think you try to call me. I'll give you my card, you can call me tomorrow, and that'll work.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
6:15.
Okay, so next we are moving into a work session with City Council. The Cottage Cluster ADU presentation and discussion. I guess I can take this down.
Yes.
Should we launch into that?
With us tonight is Garland Woodsong. He's one of the consultants on this project. They're consulting, it's a Metro grant that we received for this project, and their work on it is close to ending. So they're presenting, they've made a couple presentations to the council, and the Planning Commission's been invited to those. Some of you have been there. I don't think all of you have. So this is an opportunity to get up to speed with this project, where it is right now, and where there are different strategies that are being proposed, some of them project-related, some of them funding-related, some of them code-related. The code-related projects will come back to you after we have finished our work on the comprehensive plan. The idea is to package up a number of housing code requirements and bring them back. So tonight, Garland will be talking about those code concepts that we'll see in more detail later this year, beginning of next year. So with that,
Thank you.
Garland, you want to take us through the presentation?
Absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. So, hello, members of Planning Commission. Some of you I recognize, and some of you it's the first time meeting you.
Can you pull the mic a little bit closer?
Yes, and so we've been working on this for almost a year. Our contract is up at the end of this month. And we were invited to work with you on this cottage cluster and ADU study. It's actually two studies, but we're going to be talking about it as one effort tonight. Because, as we understand it, Milwaukee has arrived. It's now a desirable place to live, and the housing market pricing reflects that. And so
It's always been a desirable place to live, by the way.
But for some reason, the rest of the world didn't get the memo until just recently. And now the housing prices have been increasing at an extremely rapid and unprecedented rate. And so now meaning last year when we pulled the data, 24.5% of Milwaukee households spend over 50% of their income on rent for renter households. And so that's not ideal. Affordability is generally recognized as being attained when a household spends 30% or less of their income on rent. So the question is, what can be done, right? And so cottage cluster ADUs are both part of a type of housing product that we call missing middle. And missing middle housing products are neither single-family homes nor really large apartment buildings. The missing middle housing product type menu of options represents an opportunity to capitalize on market strength to provide for affordable units that fit the context of the neighborhood. And when I say affordable, I mean market rate affordable, lowercase a affordable, as opposed to what we call capital A affordable, which means subsidized affordable units. So we commissioned a market study last summer to look at Milwaukee, and the results of that market study are that, echoing Metro, or rather reflecting Metro, that there are 55 to 60 new homes needed per year for the next 5 years to keep up with demand. However, As of last summer, when we pulled the data, which at that point was only to 2017, only 40 homes total had been added to the city housing stock between 2010 and 2017. I understand there's been somewhat of an uptick in construction starts since then. We don't have that data at our fingertips, and yet I'm not sure it changes the story, which is that Milwaukee's housing production has been lagging demand. And that is part of the reason why housing has risen so quickly in price, is that supply and demand are now out of match in Milwaukee. There's more demand than there is supply. Further, what's been brought to market is largely, to date, single-family homes and a few ADUs. I understand that there may be some multifamily product that's now currently under construction, but for a while there, that wasn't being built in the city. So the broad story is that we need more housing diversity. We need more product types, more different types being brought to market. It can't just be single-family homes. And we're not quite sure that just single-family homes and apartment complexes are the answer. That's the whole missing middle product type range appears to be part of the solution that's missing from the equation right now, with the possible exception of a handful of ADUs that have been brought to market recently. The market study did say that demand for ownership products will continue to dominate the housing market by about a 10-to-1 margin. Market studies are a bit of art and a bit of a science, and part of why it's telling us that is because that's part of what exists today. And so what's uncertain is if more rental product were to be brought to market in Milwaukee than this 10% of the market that the market study says would be absorbed, what would happen? Would more renters be attracted to Milwaukee from elsewhere in the region? It's a little bit murky, but certainly the market study is pretty clear that the lion's share of the demand right now in Milwaukee is for ownership product. This is part of a range of efforts that the city is undertaking to try to address the affordable housing shortage in the city. So missing middle housing, cottage clusters, smaller, more affordable units, density in a house form that fits the neighborhood context, with that diversity of housing options and affordability at multiple price points. These are part of the elements of the Milwaukee Housing Affordability Strategy document that I believe you have reviewed previously. So we're a part of that umbrella of efforts. This effort has been done in conjunction with the public. We've had stakeholder advisory committees for both the Cottage Cluster project and the ADU project, and we've tried to provide the general public with information about these projects via the website, via the newsletter, and via an open house. So with that, the Cottage Cluster study, as I said, it started about a year ago. We're now in phase 3, the implementation phase of that study. The first phase was to learn. That was the market study and some other analyses of the existing market, including pro forma analyses of what we're seeing on the ground. Phase 2 is to design, including for 4 in particular study sites in the city, design 2 housing options for each study site. And then design a new housing cluster code. And phase 3 is to talk to you folks about that code and provide it to the city for adoption. So the stakeholder advisory group, this is a community feedback loop. We really wanted to hear from folks in the community, in particular folks in the neighborhood associations around our study sites, as well as people with development experience in Milwaukee and people with a nonprofit background who might develop these product types in the city. So we had 3 stakeholder advisory group meetings plus an open house to bounce ideas off of this group and get their feedback.
Garland, if I might interrupt, I think it's going to be really important to get to the concepts and go much lighter on the process.
Okay.
We have very little time tonight.
Okay.
And I want the Planning Commission to be introduced to the concepts
Okay.
and have some discussion with them.
Understood. Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, we will quickly run through the background then, much more quickly than that. So here's some product types. These are housing court types from in the Portland region. We did a diagnosis on the code. There's a lot of problems with the existing cottage cluster code, but the long and the short of it is that it had some density restrictions and parking restrictions, and it was not applicable in zones where single-family homes are currently built. And so as a result of these restrictions, no one built anything under the cottage cluster code, the existing one. Too many setbacks. It was a beautiful code on the surface of it, but once we audited it, we realized that it was basically unworkable. So that's neither here nor there because we have a new code to propose. We tested these code concepts on 4 study sites, all in the northern part of the city, actually remarkably close to each other. And the first of them was at 3736 Southeast Harvey Street. This is an example of a deep and skinny lot, zoning R7, 24,000 square feet. So this is the context-sensitive design. There's also another design which is slightly denser than this, not shown. So this design is attaining workforce housing levels of affordability. You can see the very bottom line shows that the larger front cottages look like they'd be priced at something that'd be affordable to 69% of the median family income for Clackamas County, and the back cottages, slightly smaller, would be affordable to households making 57% of MFI. This concept has an interesting feature, which is something of a Woonurf, or a shared street. So you'll notice that the driveway running between those front homes is doing double duty as a pedestrian space to allow folks to get to the back of the homes. For a very narrow, long lot like this, this is what Opticos Design came up with, and there's some design details that are very critical to getting this right. If that's paved with asphalt, we're not sure it works, but if it's paved with like cobblestoney pavers, or if it's like 2 concrete wheel tracks surrounded by lawn or landscaping, it needs to have something to communicate to all of the users that it's a space for people, where cars are a guest when they need to move to the middle of the site to access the parking area. But that primarily this is a place for children to play or for people to hang out. So that's very key to this design concept, is that Woonurf space. It's a little bit unconventional. The design team did have some internal debate over whether they wanted to recommend this or not, but in the end they landed on recommending it with the conditions that it needs to be designed to be a place for people. I'm going to pause and see if you guys have any questions on this site or on the design concepts shown.
Can I ask one overall question? So when I look at the pricing, and you had one on a slide that we kind of skipped through, you had a 1,600 square foot house that was $575,000 in this cottage cluster. And, you know, most of our housing, at least from 1970 and before, you know, is typically 1,500, 1,600 square feet, but it only prices out at 250 square feet. Here you have it priced out at 302 square feet per price, which even on your slide before, you know, if the average house goes for $375,000, you do the math, it still gets you at that 250. So my question is that, do the prices need to be inflated over the general market to make this work? Do you need one larger unit that is outrageously high compared to the regular market to actually make these projects pencil? Or is this just kind of numbers that you just kind of picked out?
It's more of the latter. The numbers you're seeing are representing what we're hearing are market rate construction costs. We understand that there have been folks who have been building new products in Milwaukee at a lower price per square foot construction-wise. We're not quite sure how they did it, but we think that maybe they got land cheap during the recession and have long-standing relationships with their suppliers, allow them to build essentially under market. But these represent market construction pricing. Construction is very expensive. So these are new homes, right? These are not used homes that you're buying cheap because it's resold and is paid for in the 70s. Could you bring this to market for a lesser price point? I don't know. Maybe. You'd have to have very good relationships with your suppliers as a general contractor. You'd have to get the land for less than we're assuming here, and we're not assuming a whole lot for land. These do pencil with some relatively high construction costs per square foot. Smaller homes cost more per square foot to build. It's another finding of the market study and backed up by evidence from the construction studies. So on the slide where you saw the larger unit, that's an assumption that larger unit would cost that much to bring to market. Maybe it could be brought to market for less. Is it required to balance the pro forma? Maybe, maybe not. The point there was diversity. Providing for a diversity of housing types is actually a desirable outcome. So allowing a higher income household to rub shoulders with a lower income household around the same court is actually something that is fine. We want to see that. But hold that thought, because we do have a policy that's directed exactly at making sure that those larger, more expensive units don't dominate the cottage court that I want to discuss with you.
Okay.
Garland, I'm going to point one more thing out, is the commission all received the PowerPoint in their packets. So just as another little reminder to move through, because we've basically got about 40 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Understood. Thank you. So this is the second site. It's at 10325 Southeast 36th. It's a square lot. We managed to fit a few cottages onto it with pricing at 73% and 54% of MFI. It's a fairly straight ahead design. This is kind of a textbook cottage cluster design with the court right down the middle, cluster of housing around it, and parking off to one side. So this is sort of what you would picture in your mind when you imagine a cottage court is this design. 4420 Southeast Johnson Creek Boulevard, very unique property, and the design for it had to assume actually that an adjacent property was included to provide for the access that the fire code seems to require of a 20-foot right-of-way. The flag lot that's used to access it currently is not sufficiently wide for what the fire chief wants to see here. So a neighbor mentioned that they'd be a willing seller to allow their property to be combined with this one to make a larger site. And so we assume that the developer takes them up on that offer to make this site plan work. So this is a large site cottage cluster. This site could also go for a small subdivision, but this design is not that. It's assuming that it's a housing cluster. This design includes all detached single-family homes. The previous design that I'm not showing you here is included attached products. But since this is a base zone of R7, arguable whether it has a pedestrian network connection to the frequent transit route on Johnson Creek. If it did, the draft code would allow for it to have attached product type, but assuming that it does not, then single-family detached is all that the proposed code would allow for this site. But notice again that the carriage homes allow even some of the homes on this site to get down to 53% of MFI. Final site is 10244 Southeast 43rd Avenue, just north of the Safeway. And this site has a very large heritage tree on it, an existing house that the owner wants to preserve. So this design also accommodates desire for a future street connection across the site, and then has a cottage cluster with some carriage homes and duplexes on the balance of the site. It's currently R7, but due to its proximity to the neighborhood commercial center and the frequent transit route, we assume that it could effectively be upzoned to R3 or otherwise could accommodate attached product types on it. Any questions on any of these site designs? Okay. We showed these at the open house, and we put up some comment boards, received a lot of very good feedback from the public. The public in general at the open house told us that they're generally supportive of allowing cottage cluster or housing cluster types in all the neighborhoods, allowing attached unit types within a short walk of transit, regulating elements of form instead of density as the basis for the code, and eliminating fees to encourage workforce housing. However, there were concerns around parking. So coming into the open house, we'd been proposing a lower ratio of parking. We've been proposing half a parking space per home. But as a result of the feedback from the open house, we increased that to one parking space per home, unless the site is within walking distance of frequent transit or in a commercial or mixed use zone. It seems like a reasonable compromise. For ADUs, and we'll come back to the ADU code in a little bit, but the feedback we heard was folks are generally supportive of allowing location flexibility within each lot, generally okay with allowing up to 2 ADUs for each primary home, generally okay with not requiring the ADU to match the style of the primary home, and allowing the ADU to fill 1 floor of a home seemed okay. And of course, supportive of reducing or eliminating fees for ADUs. Again, there is some concern about parking-related issues on ADUs. So the cluster housing code proposal, just a quick rewind back to a sensitivity analysis that we performed using pro formas to try to pull different policy levers and determine what the outcome might be for workforce housing in particular. So starting with a standard single-family home, new construction, using a few comps from the local market, and then the first what-if question is, what if the existing cottage cluster code were allowed at that location? What would the pricing look like? And then what if we reduced or eliminated the restriction on density, changing nothing else? What effect might that have on pricing? And then layering off setbacks and separation standards, and then removing the requirement for a private yard and adjusting the shared yard standards, allowing on-street parking to count towards the parking requirements, increasing the allowable height to 2 full stories from what we assume is 1.5 story in the existing code, given the heights that are specified, and then allowing attached unit types. So this sort of gives you a flavor of what if these code levers were pulled, what would you expect to see on the pricing and therefore the ability to act as workforce housing. And so the results are there's no silver bullets for affordability. You can't just pull one lever. You really have to pull a bunch of them to get to that workforce housing outcome because they work together. So if you allow, attached housing units, but you don't get rid of the setback requirement, it doesn't work. So you have to pull a bunch of levers to achieve workforce housing prices. It makes sense to allow the detached version of cottage cluster or housing cluster in all zones, but to allow attached products near transit and commercial areas, to regulate the form rather than density in the code, to reduce setbacks and open space requirements, to reduce parking and on-site circulation requirements, and to add bicycle parking requirements to the code, and to reduce or waive fees such as SDCs and frontage improvement fees. So home size leads directly to home price. So this is just a quick graph of that relationship between the size of the house and the price that you get. And here's the cluster housing proposal, the proposed standards. So notice the third regulating criteria here, the maximum average floor area for all homes on a site. So this is the key concept to make sure that you get workforce housing as an outcome from this code. So you can build that 1,600 square foot home in a housing cluster, and you can sell it for whatever that winds up being, you know, over $500,000. But that's now, this code says you have to balance that with a bunch of much smaller homes, so that the average size of the home within each cluster does not exceed 1,000 square feet. And because there's that direct relationship between price and size, that's the mechanism that ensures that you're going to get workforce housing out of this code. So going back to this slide, what we're seeing here is a hypothetical housing cluster with 10 homes, one of which is the big one, two of which are sort of a medium-sized 1,300 square foot home, three of which are 950 square foot, and four of which are 700 square feet. You average that all out, and the average size is under 1,000 square feet per home, and the average price is affordable to a household making less than 80% of median family income. So that's the bottom line. Any questions on this? Okay. There's three flavors that we're proposing in the housing cluster. There's the flavor for low-density neighborhoods, where the maximum height's going to be 2 stories, so that it fits in with the context of the surrounding single-family neighborhoods. There's the flavor that is allowed only in areas that are directly connected by a complete sidewalk network to frequent transit service within a quarter-mile walk. We're calling that transit-connected locations. And then there's the flavor that's allowable in commercial multifamily base zones. And so you can see the height slowly scales up from 2 to 2.5 to 3-story buildings that are allowed in each of these flavors. Let's see. The bicycle requirements of the code do not change. 1.5 secure dry bicycle parking spaces per unit, plus half a space for visitors. Remember, you don't ever build one home in a cottage cluster. You always build at least 3. So you add these up and then you round up. So if you have 3 homes, that's 4.5, so you round up to 5. So you need to have 5 secure dry bicycle spaces for the residents, and then you need to have 2 for visitors in this hypothetical 3-home cottage cluster. Also following Portland, those could be provided, the secure dry ones could either be provided in a separate bicycle room or bicycle shed or bicycle garage, or within each home in a location that makes sense. And I would say that there's a vigorous debate about the pluses and minuses of that policy in the bicycle community, but on the plus side, it providing bicycle parking within each home reduces the phenomenon of theft from the bike room. So I think that's actually the primary benefit of that, and it's not inconsiderate. If you've ever had your bike stolen from the bike room, you know what a pain that is. So continuing with the standards, in the low-density neighborhoods, the building types allowed would be only detached, but in the other 2 flavors of cluster housing code, attached units would be allowed. The building footprint goes up from 1,000 square feet to 1,200 square feet as you move from the lower density neighborhoods to the other flavors. The separation between homes is reduced from 4 feet to 0 because attached units are allowed. The front setback is reduced as you move from low-density neighborhoods to the other 2 locations. In fact, it takes on the setback of the base zone as you go into commercial multifamily zones. Some of those base zones do allow for a 0 front setback. So the thought here is to allow for the cluster housing code to match that. There's also requirements for vegetated area that echo what is found in the base zones, so requiring 35% of the site in low-density neighborhoods to be vegetated, scaling that down to 30% and 25% as you move into the higher intensity areas, because a higher intensity of built form means a lower intensity of vegetated area, essentially, so it's an inverse relationship.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So with the vegetated area, is that why you said on that one example that you gave us that the driveway could not be just blacktop because you needed vegetative area?
No, that's more about creating the feeling of a space that is for people rather than
Okay.
for cars.
All right.
If you chose to take that path of creating a green driveway with two wheel tracks, then I suppose you could count the green towards your vegetated area.
Okay.
But it's not that you would need it to meet the standard.
Okay, thank you.
We think you'd probably meet the standard just by adding up the required outdoor space per home plus the setbacks. The parking required for each flavor does go down as you get into more intense flavors. So it's 1-to-1 in the low-density areas, it's half a space per home in the transit-connected locations, and it's a quarter of a space per home in the commercial multifamily zones, echoing the goals of putting more intense development around transit and encouraging transit ridership. So are you ready to shift gears to ADUs? Okay. So ADUs, you know what ADUs are. We did a sensitivity test on the ADU code to try and figure out which policy levers make an impact here. So for this, we did 3 scenarios comparing a single-family home to a home plus 1 ADU to a home plus 2 ADUs. And then removed the parking requirement and then removed SDCs. And so you can see that the monthly rent per unit does come down as all of these levers are pulled, and that it does make a difference when you jump from 1 ADU to 2 ADUs. So the recommendations that came out of that are to allow for 2 ADUs per residence, to reduce SDCs for ADUs, to reduce the parking requirements, to streamline the review process for ADUs, to allow permit approval by right as a type 1 review, as long as the ADU meets the size and other code restrictions. To ease the design limitations, including height and location, to allow for ADUs on more sites, and to reconsider and remove the owner occupancy restrictions on ADUs, and to frame the allowable maximum size of an ADU as an absolute number rather than a number that's derived in relationship to the size of the primary home. So we went around and around, and we finally landed on just allowing for 2 ADUs of any type per primary home, rather than restricting that to 1 internal plus 1 external. The logic being, let the homeowner decide. If they have a larger lot, they want 2 external ADUs, let them build it. If they want to figure out the building code and have 2 internal ADUs, more power to them. If they want to have 1 internal, 1 external, okay. Let the applicant decide. There is a new concept that we're bringing forward in the ADU code. This is the concept of a carriage house, where you have a garage that's allowed to be at the sidewalk line with an ADU above it. The idea behind this carriage house concept is to reduce the amount of lot area that's taken up by parking, by accommodating the automobile, and therefore increase the amount of the yard that is available for people. Since there's going to be more people sharing that yard, the idea is to provide a code mechanism to expand the amount of yard that is available to be shared. The current proposal is that this would be allowable with a type 2 review, whereas all other ADU concepts would be allowable with a type 1 review. Any questions on this concept? Comments? Okay. For parking, the proposal is to not require off-street parking for ADUs. And if a homeowner is proposing to replace their last off-street parking space with an ADU, such that they would have no off-street parking, then they would be required to replace the off-street parking that would be required for their primary home with on-street parking, and if necessary, to improve their street frontage to bring it up to code standards when they build that parking spot. Does that seem like a fair compromise to you? Okay. So here's the code standards for ADUs. Just about everything is type 1 except for the carriage house, which would be type 2. The required side or rear setback would be 5 feet with a type 1. You could also do a type 2 review if you wanted to go down to a 3-foot setback for an ADU elsewhere on the site. Otherwise, this front setback would be 10 feet behind the front yard, unless it's at least 40 feet from the front lot line. Lot coverage, you'd get a 10% bonus for ADUs above that allowed in the base zone. And there would be a requirement for 40% tree coverage. By the way, that tree coverage standard also applies to housing cluster. And that is the end of my presentation. So, any questions?
I would like you to extend to the design team my gratitude for them actually pushing forward the Wiener design because that's a nice touch, I think, on that deep, skinny, lot alternative and having a shared space where the parking is still, there and accessible and everything it is a nice compromise. I'm glad that they put that forward and didn't withhold that alternative from the presentation.
I will let them know.
Any other questions or comments?
We talk about ADUs in the cottage clusters.
Yes.
So do those standards for the ADUs stand the same in cottage clusters as they do here, or are they different? Is this a single-family residence that is going to add an ADU?
As far as we can tell, reading the state laws around ADUs, a single-family residence, detached or attached in a cottage cluster, would have to accommodate an ADU. It appears that this may be an unsettled legal question that only a court case could settle, but our recommendation is to allow ADUs to in a single-family house in a housing cluster, detached or attached. So we've tried to think about what that means, and on the other hand, not overly restrict that. So the short answer is yes. If you wanted to build an ADU in a housing cluster, you'd have to meet both the housing cluster code and the ADU code.
But if I were to build a small housing cluster and know in the future that I'm going to build 4 ADUs in the back, then I could use this and not do any SDC fees or anything like that, correct? Or any other improvements?
So the thing about an ADU, as I understand it, is that your ADU has to be on the same lot as the primary home. And so there's a real question as to how a housing cluster gets carved up into lots. How does it get parcelized? Does it get parcelized? This code, the proposed code, does not require parcelization. It allows for the whole thing to remain one giant parcel and then be carved up via condominium or some other legal means. If that were the case, then the only legal way to provide an ADU, as I understand it, would be an internal conversion.
Oh, I see. So you'd have to parcel out all the lots and then...
Exactly.
Okay.
You'd have to have room on your lot to build the ADU. And if you don't have a lot, then you don't have room on your lot to build an external ADU. You can still do an internal ADU. So we've been thinking about it like, well, okay, maybe you build basements in all the buildings, and then at some later point, someone can convert a basement into an ADU. Or they propose to do that right there from the start during construction. But that, converting a basement or an attic would be your pathway to get to ADUs if you chose to exercise it.
Okay.
So we're allowing for that. In some ways, a cottage cluster is just a cluster of ADUs to begin with, right? So I don't know why you would propose to call something an ADU when there's no density restriction and you could just call it another home on the lot, unless there's some legal reason why you would want to carve it up and sell it as a chunk of 2 units rather than 2 individual units. That's up to the applicant to decide. We're not trying to micromanage that. We're just creating possibilities.
And you're proposing in the cottage cluster situation that frontage improvements should be done, correct? And paid for by the development?
Yes.
It's only on the single-family lots that aren't going to be subdivided and put either a couple of buildings or a room inside the home, that the frontage improvements don't necessarily need to be done.
Exactly. We do have a recommendation that the fees associated with frontage improvements be looked at. We understand that this recommendation is being taken to heart and that this look is happening. So that's good. It appears that the current fee in lieu of construction, FELOC, may be more expensive than it needs to be. And so our understanding is that there's a process to review that that's currently taking place that will result in that fee coming down to more closely match the market.
And in other codes with the cottage cluster, do they say, well, you have to do 50% of the street, or you have to be able to provide enough curb and sidewalk for vehicles to be able to park there that are not accounted for on that space? Or is it just the typical frontage improvement of your property?
Most of the time when you do a construction project and it's new construction, it results in a new building. To get that permit approved, the city or the jurisdiction will require that the frontage be brought up to code, whether it's cottage cluster or single-family home.
But not an additional couple of houses down to be able to provide a curb or something like that for the parking?
It's just for the lot where the permit is being pulled.
Well, your proposal was perhaps if you needed to bring the frontage up to par on an ADU, if you'd used up all the on-street or all the off-site parking spaces, you'd need to provide that parking on street. I suppose that could also happen off-site as well,
Oh, that's interesting.
to get the parking.
I assumed that because the way that it was in the presentation, it was assumed that it would be adjacent, but
Yeah.
the suggestion might be that it be.
The way we wrote that was not with the intention of allowing a FELOC. The intention
Not a
is.
FELOC, but it be,
But improvement, I mean, so if you were to eliminate your on-site parking and you were to improve your frontage to provide on-street parking, you may need to do more than just your frontage. In some instances, you may not have enough frontage.
Right, right.
I don't know. That's a stretch, probably.
Well, and the reason why I ask is I don't know if you've driven around the neighborhoods, but there aren't a lot of sidewalks and there's not a lot of curbs. And everybody in front of their mailbox has a big rut in it from the mailman that drives through there in the mud. And people, treat it as their grass or their lawn or other things. And so they feel that it's part of their property. And if all of a sudden you start introducing cars on there, you could cause a mess, even in the mud. And so that was my question, well, if you only provide one parking spot and you have 15 units, but, you expect 30 people to be there, do you need to bring some curb in there just to be able to, protect from the mess?
Our assumption is that, yes, you would need to improve that frontage to meet city standards with a curb, a gutter, sidewalk, street trees.
But only your own frontage.
Only your own frontage.
Not off-site frontage.
We also recommend that the city look at district improvements like using a LID or some other way to bring the whole neighborhood up to standard, and then to assess property owners, allow them the option of a friendly lien if they can't pay. This seems to be a best practice, but we recommend that with the caveat that that's outside of our lane. That's outside the scope of this study, right? So it's friendly advice, but you may not find it written down.
So, but there is a solution to that, and that's one of those kind of solutions.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in your report, there's an acknowledgement that the AMI for Milwaukee is different than the aggregate for Clackamas County. when you put in Lake Oswego and Happy Valley and those communities and that kind of thing. So were the AMIs used in the presentation for Milwaukee or for Clackamas County?
Those are for Clackamas County. So AMI is a figure that's published by HUD, and HUD only publishes it at the county level. So rather than trying to second guess that figure and guess what the number might be for Milwaukee, our considered approach was to use the official number, compare it against that official number, and do our best. And so, our goal is to give you tools to provide for workforce housing. We're estimating that you might be able to get to 29% of countywide AMI. What does that mean for City of Milwaukee? I don't know, maybe it's 49% for City of Milwaukee, but it's still pretty good, right? You're still allowing for workforce housing, whatever that figure is.
Do you know what the number was that was used for the median family income?
78,000. It was from 2017, I believe. When we took a look at the number for 2018 for Clackamas County, we said, no, we're not going to update that number. It's too high. We're going to stick with 2017. I believe it's 84,000 for 2018. Right. So we also wanted to use a lower number from 2017. Since other numbers in our analysis are from 2017, we decided to stick with that year. The lower number is closer, I think, to Milwaukee's number than the 2018 number for Clackamas County.
Isn't our current number 56?
Yeah, and our 2016 housing needs analysis set us at 47, and we're already about 10 above that. So it's significantly lower, to answer the question.
I also wanted to know, was there any consideration given to allowing attached units in the lower density zones when the aggregate of the attached units had a footprint that was smaller or approximate to the built form of the surrounding area?
We talked about it. We felt that the compromise we struck was the right balance between allowing for workforce housing everywhere and matching neighborhood character, whatever that means. Since the R7 zone, predominantly today, the neighborhood character is single-family detached homes, we felt that the right balance might be to continue to focus on detached structures in those zones unless they're in a transit-connected neighborhood location. If you as residents of Milwaukee feel that your neighborhoods are ready for a more substantial change, I think now is, the time to raise your hand and say that. But we're trying to find the compromise that balances, seeks the middle road.
Yeah, and really the suggestion is more along the lines of matching the built form of the neighborhoods, which may have, 1,500 square foot, housing, footprints or whatever, kind of larger, housing, which has been the norm, more recently. And then if you were to take two of these smaller units and attach them, and the aggregate of those two units is smaller than the footprint of the surrounding houses in the surrounding neighborhood, but that gets you a few more units perhaps. Was that considered, as kind of that within the vein of that compromise?
Yeah, we also looked at whether, you could allow like fourplexes. So kind of following up on HB 2001, could you say, well, you're allowed, any structure with 1 to 4 units, and you can have as many of those detached on a site as you want. We just weren't really quite sure the right way to come down on this issue, especially with the evolving regulatory context. HB 2001 hasn't yet passed. Not sure if they'll get the Republican senators back from Idaho or their undisclosed location to make that pass. So it's a fair suggestion. If that's something that this body would like to recommend, then I don't see why we couldn't make a minor change before the code gets adopted, if that's the direction you'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like kind of more of a compromise. It's like you get the policy angle of having, maybe a little bit more units that you could fit on a site, by having, pairs of units attached. But then if the resulting pair of units is about the same size and shape of buildings on the surrounding lots, then it seems like a win-win to me.
We did do a design concept on the Johnson Creek site where we did allow up to fourplexes on each one of those cottage structures, and it allowed for more deeply affordable units at that location. So that is the outcome that you would see from that policy choice.
And then my other comment, and I don't want to obsess over this too much, and I know that I want to, but I don't, is the providing the required bicycle parking inside the dwelling units. And I just want to make sure that the code, still provides for the the shared space bicycle parking, so that there's enough in the aggregate that, because that's the whole thing. You stick these in units and people just use them as a closet or a storage area or whatever, and then you don't actually get the benefit of having all of those bike parking spaces available to the rest of the residents. And so I know I appreciate wanting to have that in my own private space, and the investments that I've made on, on my family's bikes, I want those in, a secure space. I appreciate that, but I also want the policy benefit of the aggregation of, these numbers, so that, there's, we're not losing bike parking to people who just store coats there. And so I'm just trying to figure out how we get there with it.
So you get the visitor bike parking, that can't be
Inside.
that can't be inside. That has to be out and available to visitors, right?
At a half a
And that was at
space per
0.5 per.
0.5
unit.
per, yeah. So that's, it's a staple for every 2 homes. For the other bike parking, this is very much an evolving policy debate. And we proposed the compromise that is the latest compromise we've seen after much lengthy debate in Portland, not really having the resources to engage in that debate here. I would say that if you want to have that debate here, that's something that I would encourage you to discuss before you enter into code adoption. It's a very minor section of the code to change if you do want to change it.
That's kind of the state of the practice right now is to do.
I expect that the commission will pick apart the code and look at it with a fine comb as we get into it. What we're looking for tonight is an overview, the big picture concepts. But as I noted earlier, we need to finish our work on the comp plan, and then we're going to dig into this code stuff. This is important. It's been a high priority. We're going to spend time on that.
I have a question for you guys. One of the things that I was a little uncomfortable with on the detached units is the separation of 4 feet. It wasn't a 4-foot setback, which would mean an 8-foot separation. It was actually a 4-foot separation between units. And it makes me uncomfortable on a lot of levels. One, because I always assume developers will do the worst possible thing, at least in some cases, which means they'll use that and they'll push them together at 4 feet, which means no eaves on the building, which means...
Oh, you need to...
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Do I need to start over? Talking about the separation between the buildings, because they're not setbacks because it's potentially on the same piece of property, right? So it's not that question. Are you comfortable with 4 feet being the max or the minimum distance between those buildings?
As opposed to a larger number?
Yes, because thinking about where we live, the Pacific Northwest, which rains all the time, which means if you build buildings without eaves, you very often end up with buildings that deteriorate much faster. You are creating a situation where that's really not a usable space, right? You can walk between it, but you couldn't, say, plant your herbs along the side of your wall or your tomato plants or whatever, and then still have a space to walk. It just becomes such a small space that it's almost not worth even having. It's like either allow what you're saying, coupling, and then bigger spaces, which I'd be more
Yeah, I think if you were to pair them together and then you had 8 feet between, then that does become more usable, and maybe that is more comfortable.
Yeah, and also
8 feet on one
allows
side.
for better building types, right?
Yeah.
More. Is that a compromise that makes sense to you guys?
The immediate, when you were talking about that, is that, oh, well, if you allow them to be attached, then
solve
it
that.
seems really easy to then spread out the distance. Right, because then you could still max it, you could still max out your units on your lot and be able to separate that out, right? Who cares if you have two, if you can have 4, you have 2 attached, 2 units that are attached to each other, and they're 8 feet apart instead of 4 single units. Plus, it actually helps bring a single wall between 2 units, helps bring the cost down of each unit anyway.
Construction, energy, and everything, yeah.
So I'm hearing that you'd like to propose a compromise where you increase the separation between cottages to 8 feet from 4 feet, but allow 1 to 4 units within each cottage building.
I'd be curious to even see what 6 feet looked like, but, 8 feet is, that's what we had been discussing.
I think that's the right balance to strike. The reason why we were trying to push that number down was to allow for more flexibility to get a few more homes onto constrained sites to push that price point down. So this is another way to get to that same end. But as you say, 4 feet's not really usable for much. So it could be a win-win. You get more usable space, you still hit the workforce housing number.
Well, I would caution against just doubling 4 feet. I don't know what the answer is. I like the idea of more because 4 feet sounds tight, but, I would like more thought into it than just times 2. It might be something as simple as looking at, recommendations for tomato plants and a walkway through a raised bed garden, and you can find that in a lot of places, including the Oregon State Extension Service.
Yeah. You could probably get away with 6 and still have usable space against each unit and a walkway and eaves.
Right, and I don't know if I'm so comfortable with 4, if that's the right number. Maybe 3 is the right number, or 2 is the right number, or 6 is the right number.
As far as being attached to each other?
Right. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that right number is either. It could be 6, could be 4, could be 2, could be 0.
At that point, then you're building triplexes and
Garden apartments.
fourplexes and your garden apartments. You start to blur and maybe we don't care.
Right. There's...
So again, the point of that compromise was that the combined structure's footprint would be relative to the surrounding context of detached single-family houses. So when you start doing 3 and 4 units, they start becoming McMansion-sized footprints instead of...
Except that you'd propose to not increase the footprint. So your footprint's still could be capped.
So you're still saying the footprint is capped, but you could have
3.
three
sure.
Right.
600 square foot units or whatever.
That is technically what I said, yes.
Right. So playing that out, our maximum footprint is 1,600 square feet, right? Times, the max footprint is 1,000 square feet. The max total floor area per home is 1,600 square feet.
Okay.
So a 2-story building plus a daylight basement, those are going to be very, very small homes, even if you take advantage of the daylight basement, and if you divide that by 4.
But you're saying that might have to change, right? If you're calling it building footprint maximum and you're combining 2 units.
Yeah, if those 2 units become one building, then we would have to increase.
I think leaning towards, and I hate to put words in your mouth, but comparing it to the rest of the neighborhood. So if most of the houses in the neighborhood are, say, 1,600 feet to 2,200 square feet houses, right? Then combining a couple of these smaller units then makes it similar to the rest of the neighborhood.
So
right? Is that
allowing a provision to increase the building footprint to I don't know that you want to require a design study of the footprints of all the homes in a neighborhood as a part of the building permit application, or just settling on
Just
a number
we set
that
a
seems
number.
about
We would
right.
settle on a reasonable number that would probably be between 1,600 and 2,200 square feet, I would imagine. But yeah, I mean, that was, again, I'm just trying to, I was just conceptualizing this. I didn't have a fully vetted, code proposal to offer. But, yeah, certainly the idea was, if there's about a single-family detached home footprint size, then use that as kind of the max. And then if you want to put 2 or 3 or 4 units that all fit in that, in attached units that match that footprint size, or, under 2,200 square feet or whatever the threshold, the cap is that we say. But then that way those structures would end up kind of fitting in with the surrounding context.
So I'm sitting here cautioning myself just because there is a difference between a single-family home and an ADU. And if we allow a 2,200 square foot building to sit on a single-family property, we have things like flag lots. And that, if you're going to just build another single-family home and call it an ADU and then get all these pleasures,
This is cottage clusters that we're talking about, not ADUs.
Oh, only cottage clusters only?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And we're going to need to wrap this up
Okay.
to start the hearing, but
Yeah, I just wanted to feed the concept out there. I didn't want to try to polish the code tonight,
Yeah.
I
but
think it's good. I think that's a good
Good
compromise.
concept for,
It
Makes the green space more usable for people, and it saves some energy, it saves some building costs. There's a lot of pluses to that
I would
pairing
agree.
concept, at least pairing. I don't know, going past that, and I don't know what the distance is. It's 6 feet or 8 feet or...
Chair Travis, do you mind if I just take 30 seconds to address something that came up just before we received, we did receive some feedback from the public on this, and I just wanted to sort of, we've talked a lot about sort of affordability in this report. We haven't talked quite as much about environmental benefits of this type of development and fill, and so I just wanted to point out that, the encouraging Metro to expand the UGB as a means to getting us the number of units that this region needs to satisfy the demand. Suburban sprawl is very auto-dependent. Transportation is the biggest factor contributing to climate change. I think, allowing this sort of gentle density goes quite well along with our climate action plan. And so I just want us to also be considering the environmental benefits of gentle density and positioning, supporting development that is easy access to alternative modes of transportation, which we have here in the city and aren't available out in our valuable farmlands. So I appreciate your chewing on that a little bit.
great. Thank you. Thank you. Great discussion. Thanks for all the great work. I really appreciate the sensitivity testing that you've done, and I may want to email you and get more information about the proformas that you used as well, but I don't want to take up time doing that tonight, but I'm really interested in learning more about that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Please, feel free.
Okay.
Great. Thanks for including us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So are we ready to move on, Denny? Or do we need a minute to,
Yeah, let's have just
3 minutes? Okay, we're going to just take a 3-minute break to get set up and move on to the hearing. So.
Thank you. Please don't I?
The public hearing on the height variance for 5-story multifamily building is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number VR-2019-003. The purpose of the application is to request a height variance on property located at Southeast Monroe Street and 37th Avenue. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
Title 19, Sections 303, Commercial Mixed-Use Zones, Title 19, 911.7, Building Height Variance in the General Mixed-Use Zone, Title 19, 1006, Type 3 Review, and Title 19, 1011, Design Review Meetings.
All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments, testify in person, or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you're here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria, and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. Okay, so we will be limiting the testimony to 3 minutes per person, and we'll be using the clock. We don't have our timer, but just a heads up on that. Okay, so now we will ask about conflicts of interest of commission members. So, does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts? No. Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this presentation?
No.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? All right, let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
Good evening, Vera Coles, Associate Planner, here to present the staff report for the continued public hearing. I'll briefly remind the Commission of the project as we went through a detailed staff report at the May 28th hearing. Again, this is a continued hearing from May 28th. The hearing was continued to provide opportunity for the Historic Milwaukee NDA to review the project. There was an error in notification, and they did not receive the referral as required. The applicant has elected to phase the permitting process for this project. The overall project is a 234-unit multifamily development on what we call the McFarland site, the vacant site that's at the corner of 37th and Monroe. This is a two-part approval process. Again, the applicant is elected to phase that permitting process to confirm approval of the 5-story building prior to submitting for the subsequent development review application and solidifying and confirming the site plan for the project. Phase Phase 1 is tonight and was on May 28th as well. That's for the building height variance to allow a 5-story building. Phase 2 is the development review process, a variance if it's needed for something, transportation facilities review. That would include city and peer review of a transportation impact study, which is required and was scoped for the applicant to provide. So it is essentially the overall project approval. That Part 2 project approval is a development review process. Again, that's a type 2 review process. If there is a variance that's required for the fence or a wall height, we don't know because that's part of that whole site plan. That will be handled in the appropriate type. The development review for multifamily housing, including the transportation impact study and so on, that's a type 2 review process. That is a planning director's decision with public comment, referral, public notice, and so on. It would not require a public hearing before the Planning Commission. Again, the subject of this review by the Planning Commission is Phase 1 for that requested variance to allow the 5-story building. The Phase 2 land use review would commence after the conclusion of this review, once the applicant submits all the required application materials, which has not happened. The meetings that have happened to date, there were 2 pre-application conferences prior to application submittal with city staff. ODOT and DEQ staff participated in those pre-app conferences. There was a public meeting with the DLC, which was required as part of this process. DLC did submit their recommendation to recommend approval of this project. They did include a consideration for design, which the applicant did address. At the last hearing, they showed that they had accounted for that comment and had redesigned that building to account for those comments. NDA meetings, presentations, et cetera. The Hector Campbell and the Ardenwald NDAs and the Historic Milwaukee NDA all had their public meetings to discuss the project. Applicant attended the Hector Campbell and the Ardenwald the meetings. They offered to answer any questions or what have you for Historic Milwaukee, and none came forward. Hector Campbell and Ardenwald recommended approval of the project. Historic Milwaukee noted that they did not have issues with the 5-story building. All 3 NDAs did note other questions and concerns that came up that had to do with traffic. There were some environmental concerns as well that came up, so we collected all those comments, of course, and shared those with the applicant. And those would all be addressed as part of the Phase 2, Part 2 permitting of the project. This is the site plan looking west from the corner of 37th and Monroe. Again, it's a 234-unit multifamily development, including live-work units in 5 buildings. One of the proposed buildings will be 5 stories. You sort of see it there kind of to the top right of the screen. And they would be using 2 building height bonuses to achieve that 5 stories to exceed the 3-story base maximum height or 45-foot base maximum height. Residential use gets a bonus story to 4 stories, and then green building. At the last hearing, the applicant talked about what the green building system or what they were looking at. They hadn't identified a specific program as yet, and they did talk about that the green buildings that code would be applied to the entire development. Per our code, buildings that elect to use both height bonuses for a 5-story building are subject to type 3 review. It's different than it is in downtown. In the general mixed-use zone, the council elected to include that extra review process of this type 3 review. The height variance request does not result in a greater number of units in the project or being allowed at the site than would be outright allowed without the variance. Minimum density required in this zone is 25 units per acre. Maximum density would be 50 units an acre. For this site, the minimum number of dwelling units is 180 units based on the size of the property. Maximum number is 361 units. So with the proposed of 234, they're kind of right sort of the lower end of that scale at 32.5 units per acre, so well within the permitted density. As we detailed at the last public hearing, staff recommends approval of the height variance, and the detailed findings were part of that staff report and application. The commission has decision-making options this evening. The application is subject to type 3 review, which requires you to consider whether the applicant has demonstrated compliance with the code sections and the approval criteria for the height variance. You have the options to approve the application subject to the recommended findings that were submitted to you by staff. You could approve with modified findings, conditions of approval. You could deny the application with findings that show that it does not meet the approval criteria, or you could continue the hearing. Final decision on this application, including any appeals to City Council, must be made by July 26th in accordance with Oregon law with the 120-day rule based on the application date. The height variance approval criteria, which we went over at the last hearing, are here, and I'll happy to leave this slide up, or we can come back to it as we continue with the hearing. But talks about the project avoiding minimizing impacts to surrounding properties, that the project is creative, exceptional in quality, that it results in a project that provides public benefits or amenities beyond the base code, and that the project ensures adequate transitions to adjacent neighborhoods. The height variance is for a 5-story building. The findings and the recommendations from staff are generally looking at the 5-story building as being what we think of as the project for this. And I think that sort of comes through as how we've detailed out the findings and talking about the impacts of the 5-story building or the creative and exceptional quality of the building itself. So we're looking at that 5th story as how we're interpreting project for this. That concludes the staff report, since we kind of went through all the details at the last hearing, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I know the applicant has some remarks as well, but happy to help however I can.
Any questions for Vera?
I do.
Yeah.
So specifically with respect to approval criteria number 3, are the public benefits and/or amenities that are offered as part of this criteria subject to our review and any possible conditions as part of this review?
Certainly the code is requiring the green building standard as part of the requirement. The sustainability goals include that being applied to all of the buildings in the project, as was discussed by the applicant. So those would be subject to review for building permits. Certainly, they need to be able to meet those sustainability goals, or they can't have the 5th story, of course. Part of what was also part of the application was the flexibility in the site plan, which is why the 5th story was requested. So part of that is the ability for the site to achieve 40% canopy coverage, moving forward towards our goal, our climate action goal of 40%. So all of that would be part of that site plan review to ensure that they're meeting those site plan requirements in order to meet those. So yes. So the additional review would be happening as part of that site plan review and development review application for phase 2. Were there additional items that were?
Specifically, they had offered up the multi-use path segment as one of the amenities.
Correct.
That was being contributed.
Yes.
And I was, at the last hearing, I had asked about the permeability between the site, because it runs along the whole length of one side.
Yeah.
And I was asking about the permeability into the site from the trail, so that there's not just one access in the middle or at one end, but, actual connectivity throughout the length. And that is framed in the context of, is that offering, or is that amenity? And would a condition with respect to access points, the number of access points or the minimum distance between access points, be within the purview of this review tonight?
That's a good question. Denny?
I think we're looking at this as the project being a 5-story building.
And so that extra amenity is not subject to consideration tonight.
That's the way I would approach it.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that those other issues kind of come up as part of the whole site plan.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted that direction. Thank you.
Chair, I have.
Yes.
During the last presentation, the applicant had a proposal and then they had a change proposal per DLC recommendations. Do we need to condition, if we agree with the second proposal, do we need to condition that in, or is that already written in?
It's a revision to the design, so that's been incorporated in as, that's the proposed design
Okay,
that they've
all right.
submitted, so yes. So that's captured as part of the approval, yep.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Vera, have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
Yes, since the meeting packet went out, several comment letters came in. We had a packet of them for you at your desk. Let me itemize those. And we posted, I think, 3 of the 4 on the website, but we had one that came in well after 4 o'clock, so we didn't get that posted in time. But we did have a comment come in on Monday from Shasta Williams. We had a comment come in from Julie Weisner. Letter was submitted today from Chris Ortolano, and then we had a letter from Bike Milwaukee submitted today, and then an email from Nicole Perry was submitted today, and that was the one that came in after 4, so it was not we didn't have a chance to post it on the website, but you had that packet submitted. And the comments, in general, if I could sort of just kind of summarize, many of the comments, or the majority of the comments, have issues regarding traffic, location of the site entrance or the access point as identified on the illustrative site plan. And I know that Mr. Ortolano had more comments, and I believe he has comments prepared for you this evening, so I won't summarize his comments. But in general, but you have them there in your packet to review this evening as well.
Okay. Any other questions for Vera now? Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, comments from the applicant and their representatives. Come on up and state your name and address for the record.
We have a whole gang here today, so sorry about that. My name is Mark Wyzikowski with Johnson Development.
State your address.
Oh, and I'm from 3420 Tacoma, Washington, 98406.
Good evening. Tom Maservi, also with Johnson Development. I'm at 10 Mountain Lodge Lane in Mill Valley, California.
Dean Masakawa with LRS Architects at 720 Northwest Davis, Portland, Oregon.
Shall we begin?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Chair Travis and Planning Commissioners. We appreciate your time and review of our application this evening. We presented to you last month. We want to be conscientious of your time and what we present, but given some of the correspondence and discussions we've had since the last hearing, we think it's appropriate to touch on some of the applicable points just to make sure they're fresh in everybody's mind. So again, JDA, we're an experienced developer. We've developed almost 7,000 apartment units across the country. We're family owned and operated, so that dictates how we do business with those family values as we go forward. We're committed to excellence in green design and sustainability in our projects. We talked in a little more detail last month. I guess what I'd just highlight here is we're really appreciative of some of the comments that we've received about the recognition of the excellence in design that we do across our projects. And every project we do across our portfolio focuses on a high-quality design, use of high-quality materials. But what you'll see here is that every project's different. We do not have a widget that we put in every market. We want to make sure that we're using a local design team. One of our architectural team members is a resident of Milwaukee. What's important to us is that we study the market, we talk to the city, understand what their vision is, talk to the neighbors, see what the surrounding uses are, and then design a project that fits within that area. For example, a project in downtown Seattle does not make sense, in our opinion, in Milwaukee in a suburban site. And so something in like the Northeast is a suburban project in Northern California that's much more similar to what we would propose in a location like this in Milwaukee. So really what we just always try and match what we're doing to complement the existing uses. And with that, I will turn it over to Mark.
Yeah, so just a reminder, and I'm sorry that I wasn't here last time. I had a medical issue, but I'm here this time, and I'm the one that's been with the project the whole time. So in any case, this is just a summary of where the project is. I can go into the background, but you know, I think that we should spend a little bit of time on just like how we've gotten to this place. So about 2.5 years ago, I reached out to the seller, and it took over 9 months to agree to them on the contract price. And so at that time, we were reaching out to city staff, David, Alma, and figuring out what we can do there. Around that time, the city had gone through a number of visioning exercises. So they had talked to neighborhood groups. They had seen what they wanted for the site. They had tried to incorporate the site into what they were planning on doing as far as the Monroe Street Greenway, the Milwaukee, moving forward Milwaukee, the central Milwaukee area. So they had a real vision for what they wanted to see. So around that time, they rezoned the site. So this and the Murphy site, they rezoned. We had a brand new vision that we were trying to achieve. We went through a long process with the seller, and we had a pre-app meeting. And we were originally just going to do the clean portion of the site, not the portion that's kind of covered in, the brownfield. The clean portion of the site allows for residential today. It's got a clean letter of health from the DEQ that allows for residential units. So we were about to just work on that site. But in talking with the owner, we also found that we could, and the DEQ and the city staff, we found that we could incorporate the brownfield portion. So we really engaged the whole site at that point in time. So we redesigned it again. And around that time, we also had an issue with the train, the railway. It's been a really complicated site, and it's taken us a long time to get here. We've dealt with the vertical housing tax credit. So we have a commercial frontage that's changed from 37th to Monroe based on the city's guidance. We've incorporated live-work units along Monroe, which Dean will show you. We've had an easement that we have to give up 15 feet along the rail track to provide for the vision for the public pedestrian walkway. Really, all sides of our site are impacted by this. We have the train activity and all of that noise. We've just been working on everything regarding this site. But along the way, we've worked with the city staff. They've been great. We've made connections with the city. We've had 3 pre-app meetings, which Vera went into. We had a DLC. We had already 1 planning commission hearing. We've met with all the NDAs and just kept an open door policy. We've met with all the city staff, including the city manager. We've met with local businesses. We've met with the city, the new city police chief. We met with everybody. So we've taken that all into account. The project has evolved, as Dean can note, over the last 2.5 years. The project has evolved, and it's been through the neighborhood participation. We have decided to just go after a phase 1 height variance first, and then go into the design review approval. We feel as though the 5 stories gives us adequate transition of the property from a commercial use on one side to a residential use on the other side. We also think that the 5-story building allows for more open space and more amenities, more public benefits. we're really hindered by this brownfield because we can't put residential units on it. We could just put 4-story units everywhere, or 4 stories, buildings everywhere, and just not go through this whole variance process. This variance process has already dragged on a long time, but it's been worth it. It's led to things like a redesign of the roof and all of that. But we're 2.5 years into this project, and we've incorporated a lot of input into this project. So, even down to the project team, we worked with Cynthia Schuster, who works with Dean and works with Trish, who's behind us at LRS, because we wanted to know what the city wanted to see there. And we feel like we have given the city what they want to see. We're just dealing with a very complicated site. So anyway, with that said, we'll get into Dean's design and how his design of the 5-story building meets the variance code criteria. Dean.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to give some visuals on why we are here and how we came to this 5-story building on the site. So on a typical site, you would distribute your living units throughout the site, right? But what we have here is a few restrictions. Obviously, there's a restriction on where you can put living units, that brown area there. It's about 1/3 of the site. We've also are giving up some of our site area for that pedestrian pathway that's on the south side along the railroad. We will also be giving up some of our site area for parking off 37th and Monroe Street. And so those 3 factors are, first of all, we're already limiting down the amount of area. Okay, the next one. Then we looked at the visual impact and where we would place this 5-story building, and placing it in the center or more toward the train tracks allowed us to keep the perimeter buildings as 3 stories. We could go 4 stories there, but we after meeting with the neighborhood, the city, and businesses, we decided that it made sense to keep those at 3 stories. So there's a transition that steps down from the center of the site to Monroe Street, down to 3 stories, down to the 1- and 2-story houses across the street, and likewise along 37th, albeit a little further. That not only helps with height transition, but when you're walking along Monroe or 37th, the visual impact is reduced, which you'll see later on. You probably have already seen from the last few.
Yeah, I would also add that the grading of the site is such that it's a bowl.
Right.
So that's actually an average of 10 feet down from there. So it really doesn't look like 5 stories from the street, but the renderings will show that more.
Right, the 5-story is lower. So a few benefits of going with a 5-story. It allows us to open up the site to exceed the open minimum space of approximately 20,000 square feet. We're able to increase the number of parking on the site. Also, we're allowed to open up some areas for that public pathway along the railroad tracks. I should note that our parking ratio exceeds the minimum by 60, as it says there. And also by freeing up the amount of footprints, you were able to exceed or meet your 50 or 40% tree canopy. As Mark mentioned, the density you might want to go back to that. Yeah, we're not at our maximum density. We're well within the range, and so we're not trying to overbuild the site. And then also, another factor that we're looking at is we're looking into earth advantage for all the buildings, as Vera had mentioned. Okay, next one. Accessibility. So having an elevator in a 5-story apartment allows wheelchair and accessibility to all levels. And so now we're not restricted to just the first level as you would in a typical non-elevator project. So we feel that this increases accessibility to everyone. More views are available to more residents.
Yeah, and we also just offer a different product type to as opposed to the 3-story walk-up, we have a 5-story elevator serve. So it's just a different type of building altogether.
Yeah, it's the high-quality design in terms of providing that differentiation to, if you guys are familiar with other suburban projects, it's extremely rare to have elevator served. So this just is an upgrade. It's a higher quality design feature. And really, you have to have that density in one building to make that viable. It's already challenging economically. We believe it's the right thing, but you have to have that density to make that elevator in a market like this viable.
Good points. So a little bit about the building design. The site relates back to what was historically a mill site. And so that's a characteristic of one larger building in the center with surrounded by smaller buildings, or would be the housing for those people. And so this sets that up in a similar fashion. You can go to the next one here. The building massing. So again, we took cues from old mill buildings with the simple repeating vertical or horizontal elements, very simple in geometry, and then a unifying base along the building to really give it some grounding. And design materials. So we will be looking at permanent and high quality materials. So fiber cement lap siding, fiber cement panel siding, and a wood tone lap siding that really accents the decks and the ins and outs of the building to relieve you from having that flat facade. So as I mentioned, here are the views that we saw last time, and how you can see in the upper left corner the 5-story, because the site slopes down about 5 feet. When you're on the street, it's hidden from our 3 stories. Right, front right, top right, again, 3 stories is what you see. Now, the bottom left there is over by almost by the train track on 37th Street. And again, it's set farther back to reduce the height. As Vera mentioned, yes, we did look at revising the height from the DLC meeting. And the project team decided that was a good move. Both of those are acceptable and meet what we thought would be good design. So this shows, if you can read that, this is about 7 foot to almost 8 feet reduction in height by changing the roof pitch from I think it was 10-12 down to a 5-12 now. I think
that's it.
Yeah, and that's it. That's all I have.
That concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
Great. Any questions? I have a question, just I guess on like the feasibility of adding an elevator to the 4-story building. You said the extra density of the 5-story makes it feasible. Just want to confirm that, I guess, and understand that a little bit more, because it's extra units that you're adding, extra occupancy. Can you move the microphone, make sure that's...
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. So in terms of 4-story versus 5-story, it's the number of units that the elevator serves. And so instead of doing a larger 4-story building that would spread across more of the site, cutting back on what we believe are important amenities, so more parking, exceeding what's required by design, more green space, more tree canopy. By putting in the 5-story, that allows us a more compact building, but still having that density that we need to make it economically viable given kind of market conditions here to have an elevator served building.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to begin the public testimony. And again, we're going to be monitoring the time manually with our clock there, 3 minutes each. And we start with testimony in support of the application. And we don't have that. So we're moving to testimony opposed and then neutral. So we'll go ahead and start with testimony opposed to the application. And as I understand it, folks are ceding their time for one testimony, one speaker. So Chris Orlano, if you could come up and join us and make sure you state your name and address for the record, and then we will begin. So we have 4 other speakers that are allowing you to speak. So it's 5 speakers, 3 minutes each. You're not going to need 15 total.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So,
Keep it brief.
okay, great.
Do you mind if I turn just a wee bit so that I can look at the audience as well? Because
As long as you have.
Speak into the,
Yep.
Fabulous.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Kim, it's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to see you.
Members of Planning Commission, delighted to meet you. Senior Planning Director, Associate Planner, and members of our community. Honored and delighted to participate. It looks like I've got till about 8:35. Great. So I'm here for...
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please, can you give your name and
Yeah.
address? And then I will just say, we really need to make sure we keep the testimony to the applicable criteria. So just want to make sure that we remind you of that.
Absolutely. I appreciate that reminder. Thank you. Chris Ortolano, 11088 Southeast 40th Avenue for 21 years. And I would like to call to your attention my public comment, which I submitted, and I think you may have it. Good. If there's anybody in the audience that would like a copy of it, I have some extra copies. And for our viewing audience, I believe this is a live recording.
Yes.
You can go to milwaukeerip.org and click on June 25th public testimony. Before I begin my prepared comments, I'd just like to share a little bit of the background so that we are sort of all on the same page. I'm honored to let you all know that I have had some very good conversations very recently with our Senior Planning Director and our Associate Planner here in the room. And I've had some very good conversations with the developers, Mark and Tom. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day today. And I also want to support everything that they have said up until this point. There's nothing, I think, in my testimony that would suggest that I'm in opposition to the project or any aspect of residential infill projects. But I do want to call to your attention the application criteria. And I would also like to let you know that I have offered to continue this conversation moving forward, and that we do have some concrete methods for which to do that. So this is not shared in an adversarial manner. Quite the opposite. It's shared to participate and hopefully add a little bit of improvement to the design. Before I begin, do you, as commissioners, have any questions for me? No. Okay. Is it okay to ask if the developers have any questions for me?
Please just continue with your testimony. Yeah.
Fabulous.
And they have an opportunity for rebuttal after comments if needed.
Okay, great. So I'd like to acknowledge the members of the community that did submit some public comment, most notably Matt Manili and Greg Bartz-Bowman. They're with Bike Milwaukee, and they represent Lake Road and Historic Milwaukee. Nicole Perry from Linwood, Julie Weisner from Lake Road. We have with us leaders from the Ardenwald NDA, Matt and Lisa Rinker. We also have the chair of the Hector Campbell NDA, David Aschenbrenner. I have been in conversation with all of these people, and I also am the vice chair of the Hector Campbell NDA, although I am not representing the NDA in this capacity. These views are strictly my own. That said, I have been an active participant in the community decision-making process, most recently as a member of the Monroe Street Greenway Public Advisory Committee. So in my remarks, you will see that I do have a summary. I'll skip that. Thankfully, Vera has, shared some of the sort of specifics with regards to the scenario. And I do understand that this is a two-phase review for different types of permits or applications. The first is the building height variance, and that's a type 3 review. And then the second, I guess, is considered a development review, and it includes things like transportation and facilities, and that's a type 2 review. So as I'm not an attorney, I'm not a land use planner, I'm not an architect, you will probably find some error, small discrepancies. I'll try and correct those as I go. And please bear with me as I share my comments specific to the building height variance criteria as found not only in the building code, but also in the applicant's statement. So I'll be very, very specific with that. So to start my comments, I just wanted to introduce that I spoke with dozens of people, seniors who've lived their whole lives here, young families newly relocated from Portland, senior planners, and land use policy experts. I've walked the site, reviewed the building height variance application and the code. Throughout this process, one theme rings true. Milwaukee is a community of neighbors, planners, and elected officials. We have the opportunity to work together to develop an exceptional project. At the end of the day, that is the most important outcome. In the variance request, VR 2019-003, request for land use action, the applicant, Dean Masukawa, proposed a fifth story on Building 1 of the Monroe apartments on the site. The opportunity site, known as the McFarland site, is zoned for 4 stories and could be currently developed as such. Given the applicant's drawings for the Monroe apartments, the site plan also consists of 234 units, 317 bedrooms, 294 parking spots, and a single driveway at 37th Ave and Washington Street. I will now focus my comments on the building height criteria. To approve the building height variance request, the Planning Commission must confirm or deny that all the requirements in the Building Code Section 19.911.7.d have been satisfied. And to further articulate what the City Planning Department has put on the screen, I'm going to just articulate these because there's a little bit more to some of the specs, but the criteria essentially read as such. Point 1, the proposed project avoids or minimizes impacts to surrounding properties. Any impacts from the proposed project will be mitigated to the extent practicable. I do believe that is not on the slide, but I'll just remind you, any impacts from the proposed project will be mitigated to the extent practicable, which I will define in a minute. In addition, point 1 says the applicant's alternative analysis shall provide at a minimum an analysis of the impacts and benefits of the baseline proposal as compared to the baseline code requirements. I'd like to pause to see if there's any questions about that code. If I made any mistakes, I'm happy to, okay, good. The second point, the proposed project is creative and is exceptional in the quality of detailing, appearance, and materials, or creates a positive, unique relationship to other nearby structures, views, or open spaces. The third point, the proposal will result in a project that provides public benefits and/or amenities beyond those required by the public base zone standards, and that will increase vibrancy or help meet sustainability goals. Have I missed any points, any questions? Okay, I'll move to the fourth point. The proposed project ensures adequate transitions to adjacent neighborhoods. Okay. I urge the Planning Commission to consider the applicant's request in light of the height variance approval criteria specified above and my comments as stated below. And I will proceed to articulate my comments. I've got about 8 minutes. With regards to building height variance approval criteria number 1, I ask the question, does the proposed project avoid or minimize impacts to the surrounding properties? And are any impacts from the proposed project mitigated to the extent practicable? Criteria number 1 does not specify that impacts to the surrounding properties are limited to potential visual impacts. In fact, the criteria clearly states that any impacts from the proposed project as it relates to adjacent properties will be mitigated to the extent practicable. With regards to variance approval criteria number 1, the applicant stated that identified visual impacts to the surrounding single-family homes as a potential impact of Building 1's 5-story design. However, they did not refer to any other potential impacts. Given the location of the proposed site plan to provide parking for 294 vehicles and a single driveway located at the intersection of 37th Avenue and Washington Street, the proposed project actually increases the impact to surrounding properties by routing a significant number of vehicle traffic directly into the intersection, which is also the preferred greenway alignment adopted by the Milwaukee Council in 2015. So there's a typo in my comments. It should be 2015, not 16. I'm going to skip over the next part of my written comments to stay brief and on point. And I would like to ask you, with regards to criteria number 1, Planning Commission, does the location of the single driveway at the confluence of the Monroe Street Greenway, designated to encourage bicyclists and pedestrians, in fact constitute a liability due to the increased dangers posed by the complications of the intersection and increased traffic rates? Given the potential impacts to the surrounding properties and that practicable mitigation measures have not been considered, I ask the Planning Commission, has the height variance approval criteria been fully considered, and how is it satisfied by the applicant? I'm going to keep moving because I'm running out of time. I appreciate your patience. Building height variance approval criteria number 2. Is the proposed project creative? And is it exceptional in the quality of detailing, appearance, and materials? Or does it create a positive, unique relationship to other nearby structures, views, or open spaces? The applicant, who represents Tye Management Company, which is affiliated with Johnson Development Associate Group, has submitted documentation with regards to variance approval criteria number 2 that the proposal is designed with high-quality materials and a lower pitched roof to maintain residential character. The JDA Group has also been in the involved in the design and construction of exceptional quality residential buildings, such as the Natasha project, now known as the Alara in Seattle. In fact, almost all of the JDA multifamily residential projects have some exceptional quality of detailing, appearance, and materials that the Monroe apartments do not. This suggests that JDA is fully capable and aware of what constitutes an exceptional quality in a residential project and may be using high-quality materials, but this does not constitute exceptional quality in detailing, appearance, and materials as exhibited in their other projects. As stated by the applicant, quote, the building massing is characterized by the mill inspiration by the repetition of simple, vertical, geometric facade elements. In addition, the exterior materials, as stated by the applicant, are as follows: composite shingle asphalt roofing, cement siding, vinyl windows, fiberglass patio doors, metal railing, and PTAX. For those of you who don't know, that's an acronym for air conditioning. Good to know. Does the proposed project thus create a positive, unique relationship to other nearby structures, views, or open spaces, other than enhance a very small street park and build a multi-use bike path along the railroad tracks? Are either of these exceptional or unique? Given the lack of exceptional quality or any positive, unique relationships to the surrounding properties, I ask the Planning Commission tonight, has the height variance approval criteria number 2 been fully considered, and how is it satisfied by the applicant? I'm going to keep moving. Building height variance approval criteria number 3, does the proposal result in a project that provides public benefits and/or amenities beyond those required by the public based on standards? Will the proposal increase vibrancy and/or help meet sustainability goals? The applicant has submitted documentation with regards to variance approval criteria number 3 that, quote, additional landscaping and adherence to green building standards as required by the building code constitutes public benefits beyond those required by the public based on standards. The applicant has indeed proposed a multi-use pathway along the railroad tracks, which council adopted as part of the Greenway, but the current design does not ensure for the safe passage of non-motorized vehicles and pedestrians, as it will be bordered on both sides by continuous walls and fencing, making it difficult to seek refuge should a hostile encounter occur. What other public benefits and/or amenities beyond the base zone standards are required for this project to be exceptional? Has the applicant considered traffic calming measures such as additional striping, signage, beacons, and sidewalks, especially in adjacent neighborhoods where sidewalks are missing and potential cut-through traffic is significant? Given the lack of consideration for ways to provide public amenities beyond the base zone standards and also increase vibrancy, I ask the Planning Commission, has the height variance approval criteria number 3 been fully considered, and how is it satisfied by the applicant? I am moving very quickly. Building height variance approval criteria number 4, does the proposed project ensure adequate transitions to adjacent neighborhoods? The Merriam-Webster Dictionary definition of the word ensure with an E is to make sure, certain, safe, quote, guarantee. Note, there is no additional definition of this word in the city building code. With regards to variance approval criteria number 4, the applicant stated that our proposal includes mitigation measures to blunt impacts of additional density on the low-density neighborhood and new and improved infrastructure to connect the housing areas to the commercial amenities. They cite improvements to a small street park at the corner of a busy intersection of Monroe and 37th Avenue and the Greenway multi-use path along the rail corridor for providing integration and a smooth transition between the housing areas and the adjacent commercial amenities, and that the addition of these features will minimize the impacts of additional density on the open space facilities currently serving the neighborhood. Okay, I'm reaching just about the end here.
One more minute left.
Yeah, absolutely. However, the impacts of additional density are most acute precisely where the single driveway is where most residents will enter and exit their apartments, thus creating an inadequate transition to the Monroe Street Greenway street alignment. In fact, the Monroe Street Greenway Washington Street alignment is the most important public amenity, contributes the most vibrancy to the project, yet is severely impacted by the design. To the extent that the Monroe Street Greenway Washington Street alignment constitutes a transition to adjacent neighborhoods, and to the extent that the location of a single driveway at 37th Ave and Washington Street impacts that transition, has the applicant guaranteed that transition is sure, certain, and safe? I have 5 seconds. Given the lack of ensuring adequate transitions to adjacent neighborhoods, I ask the Planning Commission, has the height variance approval criteria number 4 been fully considered, and how is it satisfied by the applicant? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Ortolano?
I do not, but I want to thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
that. I am curious, when the DLC had their review, were you by chance privy to it or able to attend?
I live outside the 300-foot perimeter, which, to my knowledge, was the area to which the letters from the city were sent to anyone who might have been impacted or needed to know. And so it's only by chance, by circumstance, that I am even aware of this project. I didn't find it on the city website. I didn't go to an NDA meeting. It was only through word of mouth.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So next we move to neutral comments. And Matthew Rinker, come on up.
All right. Hey, thanks for giving me a couple minutes tonight. My name is Matthew Rinker. I live at 3012 Southeast Balfour Street. I'm also the chair of the Ardenwell Johnson Creek Neighborhood District Association. A couple months ago, we actually voted on this particular height variance, and we were in favor of it. It seemed like a good trade-off to keep kind of like 3 stories along the roads and have something that's a little larger, somewhat shielded by the rest of the complex. But also at the same time, there were a number of questions, concerns that were raised, and these are noted in attachment 1 that was in your packet. So I guess the way I'm looking at this is, in order to get the height variance approval criteria met, it's not simply, are you okay with a 5 versus a 4? There's these criteria as well. And I believe many of the questions, concerns that we have actually cross over into some of these items. So trying to entirely decouple the plan, well, let me give it right here. The part 1, which is asking for the variance, from the part 2, they're overlapping discussions. So trying to totally decouple, I think, kind of just circumvents some of the questions and things that need to happen here. So, we're neutral stance on this to give you kind of a sense of kind of what our concerns are, or the reality we're living in. I'm going to throw out some numbers that are just very ballpark. Right now, I believe the Ardenwell Johnson Creek neighborhood has roughly 1,500 housing units. Between the McFarland site and the density increases that are coming for the Hillside Park, and this doesn't even include anything that might happen at the Murphy site, we're looking at roughly 400 more units. That's almost a 50% increase in the housing units within our neighborhood. So we're interested in being a vested partner and, kind of being able to have comments, be at the table somewhere for these discussions. So on that note, yes, we think the 5-story makes a lot of sense, keeping 3-story along the sidewalk. But we would strongly urge that the committee consider making the Part 2 portion of this site review a Type 3 instead of a Type 2, so that there is an opportunity for us to make comments and be more engaged, because there's a lot of units coming, and we're not against those units. We need, some increased density. We need other opportunities for housing. But we really just get the one chance to feel that maybe we've done the best we can do to be a partner in that. So that's the extent of my comments. Any questions?
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
No, I just wanted to assure you that the Type 2 review, you still will be notified and have the opportunity to submit comments that are considered by staff for that review. It just wouldn't be a public hearing in front of us.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David Aschenbrenner is declining comment. Okay. So I believe we've captured all the comments. Do you guys have any questions about the testimony to this point? Okay. Does the applicant have any rebuttal or additional comments in response to the public testimony?
Hello. So Mr. Ortolano brought up a lot of things, and some of them are related to the variance, some of them are totally not, but I will just kind of go one by one through. We've met with Ardenwald, we've met with Hector Campbell. Mr. Ortolano is part of the Hector Campbell Association, and we've met with them, and we've talked to David plenty of times. And we remain open book. I mean, anytime they want to reach out to me, they can do so. It's not as though we're a developer that's trying to pull one over on anybody. We want productive comments. I think we bring a lot of development expertise and experience to the table. We've designed a project that we think is great. We think that the project is actually very attractive. We'll be happy to put it on our marketing and brochures. I think it's an exceptional kind of design. We have put in a lot of public benefits to the project. We were required to put in a lot of public benefits, but we also, this Type 5 variant, or the 5-story variance, allows for us to put even more, they're resident focused, but they're still benefits. We also are putting in streetways, or trees along the street, and parking along the street. We're doing a lot of work on the project. We've transitioned this beautifully from 5 stories to 3 stories to allow for that. The location of the driveway has been something that's been moved around. We've gone through plenty of site plan changes. We were actually working with Denny and Vera a lot on trying to figure out where the site plan was, and the current location of the driveway is based on city recommendation. We feel like we've used great materials, both on this building and on all of the buildings. I think that we're enhancing the use greatly. Right now, it's a vacant lot. It's been a vacant lot forever. It's got a big, scary chain link fence around it that's, at gravel. And we're going to, change that completely and change the landscape of the area. We provided landscaping. We provided green. We provided openings in the public trail As per Denny's request, we've put openings in the garage, so there are glazed openings. It's not part of this variance, but, we've worked with the city on trying to compromise as much as possible. I'll just reiterate once again, we're creating what the vision is that the city put forth. If the city wanted this to be a vacant site, then they would just leave it, zoned as a vacant site or whatever. But they want housing, they want density on the site. We haven't pushed density here. Parking is one of our biggest constraints. So, we've put together what we think is a great project. And we have a ton of extra things that we've put into the project. We've put in windows that we've got a huge allowance for windows because of the train activity. We've got increased insulation. We have air conditioning, which is like a first for the area. So, I think that the project as is very good. We can discuss further with Mr. Orlano or with any of the NDA or with any of the city staff about how to change the project. But right now, we've gone through 2.5 years of kind of massaging this. So we think it's really good. We want to reiterate that we don't want any conditions of approval as part of this variance request. We think that once we submit the traffic and we get the ODOT feedback and we get the city feedback and we get some more neighborhood feedback, that we'll be in a better position to respond to a lot of these things. But right now we're just kind of designing in a bubble, and we want this city to see everything that we have going forward. Tom, is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So again, just from a high level, we're very grateful that all 3 neighborhood associations, as Vera mentioned, they were supportive of the 5-story variance. I think, as you've heard, we are open and transparent in this process. We know this is the first part of the process. We're fully committed to make sure that we're seeking the community involvement, the feedback from the city in terms of that type 2 process. We know there's a lot of design work to do. There's a lot of studies that need to happen. And I think what's representative of that is, as we spoke about, if we wanted this to be a process without involvement, we would have just done a type 2. We could have put 50% more units than we wanted to. We wanted this to be the best project. We know this opened us up to a public hearing, but we think that's the right thing for the project. We think it's the right thing for the site, and so that's why we're doing it. If we didn't want to do that, we would have just done a type 2, maxed out density. We could have done this with all the public process. But so I just ask you to consider that we know this is just the first part. We've demonstrated that we are willing, and we know we can continue to improve our project with city feedback, with neighbor feedback, but that's really what the type 2 process is for. We've worked with the city to make sure that the people who wrote the code, that we've satisfied those requirements of the variance, to make sure that we're presenting something that both we're proud of and satisfies the conditions of the zoning. So, with your approval, we're excited to continue to move this process forward.
Thank you. Any final comments for the applicant or questions?
I have a question. Does JDL see the bicycle path as a public amenity that is used for the height variance?
And you're talking about the Monroe Street Greenway?
I'm talking about the bicycle path on that runs by the railroad.
Yeah, well, we're seating 15 feet total along the largest portion of our site. So it's a huge amount of lot square footage that we're dedicating to it. We're also making some design elements so that it's as useful as possible. So we're putting a bioswale next to it. We're stopping short a lot of the buffering so that trains have visibility. So we're spending a lot of time on that element. We can talk about it more during the design review element, but it's something that we spent a lot of time on already.
So are you putting that? Are you putting the bicycle path forward as an added public benefit to help counteract the height variance?
Yes, we do believe that's part of the 5-story variance. We also believe it's the right thing for the site. So we believe it's the right process, but it is part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The public testimony portion of this hearing on file VR-2019-003 is now closed. No further testimony can be taken unless the public hearing is reopened. Is the commission ready for discussion?
May I ask a question of staff?
Yes.
So, Denny, typically type 2 is done by written correspondence. Is there anything in the rules that says that a type 2 cannot be held at a NDA meeting where you can take direct questions and concerns from and take public comment in a meeting setting?
I think there are many ways we could take in input, but the type 2 process is typically one that requires that written testimony. It's like, how do you create the record is the key question. And the way we create the record for a type 2 decision is through written testimony. The planning director is the one making that ultimate decision, but I will be relying on the input from the public, the application that comes in, as well as a lot of information from the engineering department. The type 2 decision is where we are going to talk about the transportation impacts. The type 2 application is when the traffic impact study is submitted. We have not done any review of transportation at this point.
No, I understand that. But my question was, does it have to be in written form? And it doesn't sound like that it has to be.
Well, I don't know that it has to be, but it typically is, and I'm not sure if we want to do anything other than that at this point.
Okay, all right.
Okay. All right.
I was avoiding a direct answer.
Okay. So we'll start over here with comment.
Well, we received our direction, at the beginning, which is that, the elements, including the bike path that are contributing are not up for consideration. So the details for those will be worked out later. It sounds like, they were considering, the permeability or the usefulness of the bike path along the length of the site, which was my, primary concern, was opening that up. But that's not really what we're here to consider. So it is important to, I think, to look at this in terms of, what's the alternative, and, the alternative to this, say we were to deny this or over-condition this, the alternative is that they build 4 stories around the whole site, and, then they don't need this approval. But with this approval, they have a better product, a better contribution to the community. And so I think it is important to maintain that scope for what this review is and what the alternative really is, and to think about, is this better than 4 stories around the whole site? It's whether they have one driveway or not is not impacted by whether this building gets a 5th story or not. So, in the location, the site layout, all of that stuff just is not impacted by whether one building gets an elevator and a 5th story. And so I think that narrowly scoped within these parameters and this criteria, I think that it does achieve what is required for us to approve it. And so based on the direction I received earlier, I think that I am prepared to vote for approval tonight.
Okay. You ready?
I think you should not let Commissioner Edge go first because he says it too concisely and eloquently, and I just don't have anything to add beyond that. If I would have went first, he could have added on what I had to say.
Oh, next time you're first.
I
Okay.
can add on to that. I agree.
Okay. All right. Go down the row
Well
here.
said, Commissioner Edge. I think, what's unfortunate is when I listen to testimony at the on approval criteria number 1, and where, if we're not applying criteria to visual impact on the height variance of a building, and that is opening a door to impacts, well, I don't think we're going to be successful in carrying out any land use hearing, because that could mean we have connections made to perceived impacts that we don't have the ability to address through what our charge is and through the criteria. In other words, I don't know how else we're supposed to speak to this other than the criteria on visual impacts, because they are adding a story to the building. And I also do consider the amenity provisions as an aspect of what they're doing to enable the penciling out for them, I suppose, of the siting of the 5-story building is actually a better and a better practice, a better practicable thing, because otherwise they're going to build 4-story buildings and they're going to maximize how many units they can get, and it's going to incur more impacts than it would otherwise. So I think I'm thinking we're all aligned that we need to be within the bounds of trying to address these height variance approval criteria as speaking to the impacts in the terms of the visual impact of the building, and perhaps other impacts if they're stated in the criteria specifically. So I'm also inclined to approve this one.
So, Commissioner Edge, if somebody used an amenity of 12 bicycle racks, and we thought the amenity needed to be 15, we would change that amenity to qualify for our variance. Now, the applicant themselves said that this bicycle path is specifically there to get the bonus height. I would say that I would like to hear what you are proposing or what you are worried about before I close the door on what you would like to see in that amenity.
So I basically stated it already, which was that I just wanted better connectivity between the length of the path and the site itself. And so, it was framed in a certain way in the letter that was submitted, but ultimately, you're just looking for that connectivity, that permeability. It does allow for, if there's some hazard or whatever, then you have the ability to, get into the site or get away or, whatever, but also just ease of access from the site. You don't want to have to go all the way to one end of the site to get to the bike path and then go back the other direction. You want convenient access.
So some entrances on and off.
Yeah, just some porousness between the site, because right now it's tucked away behind the garage. And so that was, it was just looking for some openings, some porousness throughout the length of that, that boundary between the trail and the rest of the private part of the site. So just having some connectivity along the way, whether it's every 50 feet, every 100 feet, every, whatever, just multiple connections along the length of the site was all I was looking for.
And you are well versed in our land use rules and transportation plan. Is there anything in our transportation plan that would come up during the Type 2 review to guarantee that any of those access points would be granted?
I don't know that it would be as a requirement in this case. I don't know that having a public path that you've dedicated an easement for along the whole side of one lot line, I don't know that there's necessarily any requirements for the permit, for connectivity along the length of the property lines. I think that that becomes a public asset. It's a trail. It has two ends. There may be a connection, one or more connections along the way. I don't think that there's any requirements there for connectivity spaced at any specific intervals along an amenity like this.
So Chair Travis, what I would like to recommend, I am for the building height variance. I think the number one biggest amenity that you get is the 3 stories and the open space and be able to cover the tree canopy. All else being said is going to get figured out later. But I think what I would like to do is I would like to ask the commissioners to make some recommendations before we completely close the hearing after our vote.
Is that allowed?
Recommendations? Do you mean conditions?
No, recommendations. Recommendations for staff.
Okay.
Towards one would be a public amenity that is being used for the variance. And I also have another.
Well, you can do that, but I think it's a little awkward because there is a chance that you will see a type 2, an appeal of a type 2 decision.
But that would be specific to the individual decision that you made, right?
If you were making particular recommendations about this application and then say those don't show up in the approval, I mean, I think it's somewhat complicated.
I mean, we can weigh in on the process.
You know what? I will argue this tooth and nail. If they say that it is an amenity for their variance, then we should be able to make that amenity the best it possibly can be.
Greg, when you asked that question, they answered a different question. The bike path is not because of the height variance. The way they answered the question is the project as a whole is exceptional and the bike path is part of the project. I don't think there's any nexus between the bike path and the height variance that you're trying to make here.
Okay.
It was a very carefully worded thing, and
meaning that they are not, that the two, if they don't get the height variance, they're not going to do the
bike
path.
path might be, that was not stated, and we don't have
case.
any information in front of us that the bike path will look any different if it was 4 stories.
I thought my question was very specific.
And they answered a different question. That's what I observed.
That's what I observed as well.
All right, well, if I don't have the support for it, I don't have the support for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough call, and, I don't want to take a bunch more time to, argue my point again, but, it's, I was under the impression from the phrasing in the applicant's narrative that the bike path was one of the amenities that justified the variance. But if the bike path is, if that dedication is required, whether we do the variance or not, then it's not really part of this review. Mm-hmm. I mean,
it was part of a negotiation to vacate an easement through the site.
But not for this element of the project.
Correct.
Right.
For the whole project. So even if we denied this tonight and they got they did 4 stories all around the building, they still have to dedicate 15 feet for the bike path.
Correct.
Okay, so that frames it for me that, there's not really there's no nexus between this review and that particular amenity, even though it's specifically cited in the applicant's narrative.
Thank you.
Okay.
Based upon the limited scope of the variance request, I don't see any reason not to approve the height variance. I think left unsaid are a lot of other issues that are going to come up in the type 2 review. And I will just tell you, my biggest concern is that intersection I hate.
For the railroad.
What is it, 37th and Railroad, I guess it is, and the railroad crossing. And it looks like the access to the parking lot is going to be right there. And I just think it's a complicated intersection. So we have to be careful how that's done.
Agreed.
which will come out in the traffic impact study.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's also going to be shaped by what ODOT says.
Right? Yeah. I mean, this is by no means a done deal. I mean, there's a lot of, like the applicant said, a lot of studies that need to take place and additional information and approvals on process. So, yeah,
That may be
agreed.
my only chance to say something, since we may not have a public hearing.
Yeah,
So
good
that's
point.
my concern.
Good point. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to speak to some of the things that I think meet the criteria. So, in my opinion. So, I really like the idea of an elevator because we do have a lot of folks who are interested in aging in place and really don't have a lot of options in our city. And so by allowing, this building height, which then enables an elevator, I think that gives another option for folks who are looking for new living opportunities. So I feel like that is something that is, exceptional in that, with only having 4 stories, we're not going to get the elevator, and people may not have, they would have ground floor access, but again, not access to other units within a building. The tree canopy, which has been mentioned by several of us here, I think is very important to meeting other goals that the city has as well. And so from that sense and thinking about the criteria, again, I feel like that is a public benefit and an amenity. And I'll finally say, I think that in terms of the adequate transitions, we got to keep in mind that it's abutted by a commercial district too. So it's pretty dense in that area. And so I think that the idea that you would have additional density there on the site, makes sense to me with the lower stories, surrounding closer to the neighborhood. I think that to me does seem like that it meets adequate transitions, into the neighborhoods from the commercial area. And then I think that those are the main things. I do also like the idea of live-work units that are allowed there. And so I really, in looking at the specific criteria for the building height variance, I feel that they highlighted a number of things that directly speak to the criteria and a number of things that are important to the overall city vision and plans as well, and things that we've heard from the public in open forums, town halls, and so forth. So just wanted to highlight those for the record. Anyone else have any?
Chair Travis, if I may,
Yeah.
are we all on board with the 512 pitch design and not the 812 pitch?
The DLC recommendation?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we got that on the record, since the applicant did show both pictures again.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, thank you.
I would like to make a motion to approve the application VR 2019-003 and adopt the recommended findings and conditions of approval found in Attachment 1 of the materials submitted for the May 28th public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Project is approved.
Before you read your final conclusions, I would strongly like to suggest, and if anybody wants to make it a recommendation, I will second it, that after all final decisions are made with the Type 2 and Type 1 are completed, that the planning director meets at one NDA meeting, inviting the other 2 NDAs, to schedule a time to explain his or her decision and rules and answer any questions. There are 2 reasons for this. 1, it addresses the concerns from NDAs and eases worries of density. And 2, it gives planning staff the opportunity to explain once instead of answering 500 emails that will be coming in once the decision is made. I believe in this so strongly that if you would like it, I would be willing to be a moderator for that event.
I'm happy to do something like that. I mean, I might also be interested in going to NDA beforehand, too.
I think that would even be a more excellent idea, but
We'll play that by ear. We don't have an application yet.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will say, appeal rights. If anyone wishes to appeal this decision to the city council, you must make an application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing notice of this decision. Please see planning staff for details. Other than that, thank you very much to the applicant. Thank you very much to the neighbors who came tonight, and appreciate all the involvement and look forward to the next phase of this process. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I went through this next
Okay.
one.
All right.
I didn't realize that it was 6:12, and I was like, oh crap, I made all my comments off of 6:12, now I gotta read all the 6:20s. I was like, that sucks.
David, are you still awake? Oh, yeah, there he is.
Thanks, David, but I'm waiting for the next email.
I know, I'm freezing.
I know.
Brought my
It's
jacket.
colder inside.
Very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark. Okay. We've got another item coming up. Yeah.
I'll wipe my hands.
Thank you.
Thank you, very nice to meet you. Thanks.
Safe travel.
Oh, were you on my lap? I like that.
Is that ex parte?
No, because I didn't find out till about now. I get drunk during this, I know that's
You know you're on the air when you say that.
plausible deniability.
Are you ready, or?
Are you ready?
I am ready. I didn't know if you had moved on to our item yet. But anyway, I am David Levitan, a senior planner here with the City of Milwaukee. We are here tonight to check in with the Planning Commission on draft policies for Block 3 of the Comprehensive Plan Update. This is the third and final block of work, along with a concurrent housing block that ran along blocks 2 and 3. Our schedule has been a little bit different on this block. Typically, we would have had more of our public outreach before we had gotten to this stage as far as having draft policies, because of the amount of work that we had done on the housing block and the amount of outreach that we did on that and on associated projects like the ADU and Cottage cluster projects. We wanted to push back the public outreach a little bit more, and so we're a little bit farther along as far as policy development. So the purposes tonight are to take a look at the draft policies that were first sent out as attachment 1. Those are the same version that were reviewed by the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee last Monday night. We subsequently incorporated the CPAC's comments into a revised set of policies that are included in attachment 2. So I would suggest, if we're going to be reviewing the policy language, that we be using attachment 2. And then you'll find as attachment 3, we did get comments from the North Clackamas Urban Watershed Council, or NICUIC. And so they had a lot of good comments, a lot of focus, as you would expect, on natural resources and environmental quality. Those two have been combined into a set of policies, along with the other two topic areas within Block 3, which are public facilities and urban design. Urban design is a new set of policies that don't currently exist. It incorporates some things kind of from general land use and transportation issues. It incorporates a little bit from kind of some neighborhood-related policies, but this is really something that we had heard from the community that we wanted to get a little bit more into the form and function and look and urban design and urban form of what Milwaukee is going to look like over the next 20 years.
So I would say in going through these, in recognition of your bylaws, we probably won't have time to go through all of them on an individual basis. I would say that as we're going through these, each set of policies, for the purposes of public engagement, we're going to be holding an open house on July 15th. It's going to be a little bit of a different format than the town halls that we've had because we're at a slightly different stage. We wanted to basically bring up 4 or 5 kind of major issues per per set of topic areas. So 4 or 5 issues related to urban design, 4 or 5 issues related to natural resources and environmental quality, 4 or 5 issues related to public facilities that we can basically kind of get feedback from the community at the July 15th open house, which is going to be at 5:30 at the Public Safety Building. And then there will be a complimentary online survey that's going to largely mirror the questions that are asked at that open house. We're still working on the content for that, so we would like to get kind of any hot, topics, hot button issues related to any of these topic areas. We'd appreciate the Planning Commission's feedback and any kind of major things that you really think we should be checking in with the community on as it relates to these 3 topic areas. So with that being said, I don't know if you have a preference, if you'd like to kind of walk through each of the 3 sets of policies or kind of have a focus more on things that you really want to get feedback from the community on as part of the public engagement. I would leave it up to the commission as far as kind of how you'd like to kind of walk through these.
Yeah, thank you. So we, have about 45 minutes before we expire. But does anyone have to, I would prefer not to wordsmith. Obviously, we don't have time to go line by line.
Yeah, I think we should get some general concept, and we should start it. I have a feeling Commissioner Edge is going to have some comments about the natural resource.
I have comments about all
stuff. I have comments as well. So I would say take it each one at a time.
Natural resource and environmental quality policies. Maybe we should earmark 10 minutes, and then we'll check and see where we're at within this particular set.
Okay.
All right? Well, why don't you go ahead first?
All right, so I have in natural, and this is one of my pet peeves, and I think this is the only place where I'm going to be able to get it in. But under goal number 3, which states protect and conserve fish and wildlife habitats, I would like to add a statement that says, do an on-the-ground survey to verify habitat conservation area are appropriate or need to be enhanced or reduced. In other words, get the Google map and the guy on the computer out of it, actually do something, get the parking lots out, because I think not only are we missing habitat, but we're also drawing over paved things that aren't particularly considered habitat. And if we're going to strengthen the rules around the habitat conservation area, which most of these goals say that, they should be accurate and correct.
So you would have that as a proposed policy underneath goal 3?
Yeah, I would put that as you could say either something nice, like make sure that our maps are accurate and correct, or you could do an on-the-ground survey.
Well, goal 1, number 5, basically says periodically update the city's inventory of wetlands.
No, because mine's different, because if it is not an on-the-ground survey, it's the guy sitting at Metro on Google Maps drawing it around trees and streams, which is ridiculous.
Well, I think
if we're gonna
want to add it or adjust it, 1, 5.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Is do goal.
If you wanted, with field verification.
Oh, there you go, with field verification. No, that's good.
And I'll just point out that, the comments from the Watershed Council, they highlighted and read the expanding number 5 to include wetlands, floodplains, fish and wildlife habitat.
Oh, there, and conservation area, habitat conservation areas.
So sounds like expanding that number 5 is consistent with the Watershed Council and So you're just adding that like field-based part.
And
Okay.
when you are doing, I mean, there are regulations related to local wetland inventories, and whereas you do need to do some kind of verification, the point is to not just rely on what Metro did in the mid-2000s for Title III and Title 13 purposes as far as their plan. And so we could work on some language that in addition to what you would be required as part of local wetland inventory, we could expand that to HCA's, and the Watershed Council had some additional comments.
So I will say I'm the chair of the North Clackamas Suburban Watersheds Council, and I did not participate in their drafting of these recommendations, but I do trust them to make sound recommendations, and so I do voice general support for what they have contributed. I have my own notes as well. Referring to 1.5, since we were just talking about that one, I wanted to also add major wildlife movement corridors and essential habitat for sensitive or threatened species, and identify those as such. I think it's probably important that we have people review the regional conservation strategy and the biodiversity guide that Metro has published, or the Intertwine, I guess, has published in recent years, so that we can make sure that we're, addressing all the different kinds of habitat connectivity, including landscaping along the edges of parking lots, and places where you don't necessarily think is habitat could be habitat. And so it's really important to make sure that we're considering all of those different kinds of connectivity elements, and then documenting those as such, and having an inventory that we can rely upon. I have notes elsewhere here that, basically to start assembling a city inventory, not just based on, your own, but based on development reviews and what's required input from development reviews, and use that to help form the inventory. On 1.1, my note is that it's perhaps appropriate to enumerate the types of partner entities, but it really could include others, such as private foundations, for-profit corporations that restore habitat for Superfund credits on behalf of Superfund polluters, academic institutions, other types. And I just want to just generally recommend caution when enumerating lists of things, and to consider calling things out as non-exclusive examples when it's inappropriate to constrain the list to only what is enumerated. The other thing with 1.2, I wanted to specifically add pursue funding for, or after pursue funding, also to include legislative and administrative rules changes in addition to funding. That would help for the acquisition, protection, or enhancement, blah, blah, blah. So really just, to include that in the legislative agenda. Already addressed 1.5, and I'm ready to move on to goal 2.
Okay.
Okay.
And just for our purposes, because your comments have been really great on the previous blocks, do you have these typed up, or are they kind of written?
I do. They're a little bit more shorthand than usual.
Okay.
I could certainly submit these to you in writing if we don't want to discuss everything that I...
It's for the purposes of having your notes, which are probably better than my scribble.
Yeah, I would like to hear what you have to say.
But then also submit it in
so
writing.
that if we don't all agree.
Okay. Well, that's good.
But I will say, we have roughly like 4 more minutes to cover this
section.
This section. I mean, 5 more
and
minutes.
so I already gave my blanket support for the Watersheds Council recommendations, so we don't have to go into those in detail. But so like on 2.1, I wanted to. Did this change? Oh,
Yeah.
these are 612.
Yeah, I did the same mistake. I worked all my notes off of 612, then I had to go back and read 620.
No, all my notes are off of 620, and so I need to actually make sure that I'm looking at 620.
So 620 starts on page 14.
You got it. Oh, I tore it apart. So.
Yeah. 7.1, page 14.
So this would support programs and regulations to enhance healthy watersheds and maintain resilient floodplains. And I do want to wordsmith this because I just don't like it. I think that we need support programs and regulations to enhance and maintain the health and resilience of watersheds and floodplains.
Okay.
I mean, it's not, when you pair together enhance healthy watersheds, well, then are you neglecting the ones that aren't already
It's as
healthy?
if to say you already know there's healthy ones, and that's what you're enhancing.
No, we want all floodplains and watersheds
I
to
hear
be enhanced and maintained their health and resilience. 2.2, support efforts to restore Kellogg and Johnson Creeks and their tributaries and remove the Kellogg Dam. I want the tributaries in there. 2.3, also wildlife movement corridors. So on 2.4, this was maintain the city's regulatory hierarchy.
So I want to make sure, because that's why I had like in goal 3 about the habitat conservation, because it's about conserved fish and wildlife. If this is all about water quality and water resources, is it really, do we need to put in the habitat corridors?
Maybe not, but it jumped out at me that as part of water quality, I mean, they're interrelated, but maybe it's.
When I was going through this too, I was like, oh, no, we need to add it. And then I was like, oh, well, this is about water and water quality.
Yeah. On 2.4, I'd like applicants to show their work to justify proposals that do not avoid resource areas. I'd like to see an example, when someone submits, proposal, see an example of a code compliant proposal and have the applicant describe why it is not feasible to avoid and to implement that proposal that is code compliant.
What? 2.4 stands out in that it's about natural resources rather than water quality and water resources, and maybe fit under goal 1.
Yeah, that might be a good point also. But since it was touching on the regulatory hierarchy, avoid, minimize, mitigate, that's always been one of my concerns with that hierarchy, is that, you can come in and say, well, it wasn't feasible, and so we're not going to do it.
Right.
I'd like to understand why it's not feasible to do a full avoid proposal.
I think that you're right. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of the public engagement around this is that will businesses and industry attend that? Or how are we engaging with them to say, here's what we want to do, and you're located along Johnson Creek, so to get feedback around the property owners that are like interacting with these habitat and and creating air quality issues and so forth. So how are we ensuring that we're going to be getting those eyes on these policies to give us that sort of practicability of implementing them?
I did leave out that as part of our public engagement, in addition to the open house and the online survey, is we're also scheduling some focus groups with different stakeholders, the Latinx community, the kind of natural resources community, and then also the development community, which is a pretty broad term.
So we could expand that to just sort of the economic development interests and try to capture the industrial.
I think that would be helpful, I think that we often, we don't invite them, or, they're hard to get too, obviously, but it would be really, I think, helpful to, give them a heads up, around things that we are trying to accomplish. And then also to, sort of get that feedback on, just like to the extent practicable and that kind of thing, that we're going to be asking them to do certain things.
Yeah, a lot of these things are regulated at the federal and state level, and we have very limited authority to really do what maybe ideally we would want to do. It's just not within our purview to regulate a lot of things related to air and water quality, especially. We help to implement them and to monitor. But ultimately, if you're in compliance with DEQ and the EPA and, other state and federal regulatory authorities, there's not a whole lot we can do other than recommend things. That's where things like good neighbor agreements and other things, nuisance codes, and, we kind of have a limited arsenal as far as what we can actually do to try to address some of these things.
In the land use arena, anyway.
Yeah, okay.
And then on 2.5, we say manage floodplains, and I just wonder, do we mean regulate floodplains?
I think so.
And then also specify floodwater storage. Increase floodwater storage capacity. I mean, maybe specify that. Maybe it's not necessary.
We're going to need to move on, I think, to...
I'm almost there.
You're almost there?
Let him go.
Okay, all
Let him
right.
go.
Well,
Water's his big thing, so.
okay.
You'll be surprised. 2.6, again, love-hate the list. I think that we might just want to refer to best available science to achieve certain outcomes. And then the science will specify, temperature, quantity, turbidity, blah, blah, blah. 2.7, maintain stormwater detention and treatment standards based on the best available science to meet water quality and wildlife habitat protection goals and standards, with a preference for stormwater facilities designed to leverage ecological services, followed by designs that mimic natural systems, and then lastly, require mitigation for designs that do not leverage or mimic natural systems.
I may need the notes on that one.
Yeah, I just want people to call, red flags if you disagree with anything that I'm saying. Goal 3.3, expand list of prospective partners, rephrase to remove barriers to fish and wildlife passage along waterways and wildlife movement corridors. 3.4, again, refer to best available science and reference habitat and water quality as objectives. Temperature and woody debris are just examples, but should not be limited.
Yeah, yep, it's a good one.
3.5, also wildlife movement corridors. I mean, those are things that should be mitigated, that it ruins habitat to have them not connected. And then I have 6 additions to this section, including developing a wildlife movement strategy and a framework plan, implementing a program to identify wildlife movement corridors, document and prioritized wildlife vehicle conflict areas, maintain roadway design standards that provide an array of alternatives for safe crossings of wildlife based on these identified species and the duration of conflict opportunities. It's just making these connections meaningful and actually accomplishing the policy goals is really the intent of this. Compile and maintain, I think I already touched on this, an inventory of plant and wildlife species and movements from information gathered during development reviews for which that information is required. Periodically share with and compare to ODFW sensitive species lists. Apply requirements for plant and animal species and movement documentation to...
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm adding stuff.
These are getting very specific.
And that's what I'm wondering is...
And they're supposed to be very general.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be is to create strategies to whatever your overall concept is.
I wrote down, do a plan.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. No, that's a
I
great
think that it's basically covered in that first bullet that I started, adding, which was develop a strategy and a plan.
Yeah, I think you could leave it at that and let the details work.
Yeah, and then clear and objective standards for subdivisions and single-family housing development that require appropriate wildlife connectivity measures, and then refer to Wasco County Land Use Code for turtle conservation.
Okay, see, there's another real specific one that should not be in there.
It shouldn't be in here as a policy, but I wanted this in here as a footnote, so that they're considering, because there's really good stuff in that land use in that particular.
Make it a sidebar.
I think we can definitely, there's an opportunity to roll up several of these into one.
And then there's 2 more that are referring to goal 4 and goal 6, but and then we can move on. And that was really consider under 4, add a policy, consider stormwater implications for tree removal, and then 6.6 also bird-friendly lighting and windows.
Oh, there you go.
Where was your tree removal or urban forest, right?
4.A or 4. Next.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think from this section, I think it would be good to get feedback about the urban forest idea. I mean, I think that could be a really good topic to engage the community on. I mean, it doesn't have to be real technical. I mean, that's the thing with some of these other goals that have some of the technical language, you know, talking about urban forestry, I think would be a nice
People
step.
get it, it's trees.
People get it, and, you know, and you can like give examples, and so that's my suggestion as one thing that would be a good topic, so. Anyone else on the town hall, not town hall, but the open house and specific ideas for engaging communities on the community on this natural resource environmental quality? If so, let David know. Moving on.
I mean, you could do goal 1 too. I mean, that one's pretty, until a hydraulic expert comes up there and starts giving you a list of sea turtle data.
So, draft public facilities and services policies. Do
I
you
would
wanna
like to
give an
clarify that those would be river turtles and not sea turtles.
Thank you. Pond turtles. I have some on this.
Okay. Also, we want to hear from our other people, too. You don't have any stormwater stuff to add?
Yeah.
Redundant.
Okay, all right. You're like, I defer. Okay.
So I have goal 1, number 6, I put, and it must be to change. Oh, you know, it goes on with the list thing.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
the thing with the list, and so I simply said, to support their development, except where the city may provide incentives as prioritized or as outlined in the city vision, instead of putting affordable housing to low-income households, net zero buildings, annexation, just cut all that out and just put in priorities outlined in the city vision.
That came from,
I know.
no, well, that came from one of our meetings at the CPAC, where these ideas were spelled out, but I understand the concern about limits.
Because our city vision may change. Things may change.
Yeah.
Can you do the sidebar thing that we talked about in some?
Yeah, as examples like we were doing with the housing thing.
Also, is the vision a controlling land use document that we can actually reference as part of this in the eyes of DLCD?
Well, you can reference it as far as providing, guidance to the city's kind of overall 30,000-foot goals. It was adopted by resolution, so it's not a land use document, but, you would need to basically, it's essentially vision, and then you would need to establish policies that
You link to it, right?
to basically help to implement that vision, and then you have codes the next level down in the
Yeah, I just don't know that we can refer to it legally.
Well, the vision will be in, the vision statement will be in the comprehensive plan. It is now. It's at the beginning of the comp plan.
Yeah, okay. I just wasn't sure on that.
The vision's less important in there than the other items. It was just that was a catch-all, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were going to say something?
In the public facilities, I just have a general comment that I've been, the word ensure is can be a weasel word in that it doesn't actually say what we're going to do. You just sit back and it happens because we wrote a policy down. So I think a lot of places where it says, ensure that developers pay their proportionate share, what we're talking about is policies and code. So implement and enforce policies and code that require developers to pay their proportionate share. Ensure 1.9, ensure the city's infrastructure and facilities is develop plans and funding for facilities to reasonably withstand. And so I would just generally avoid the word ensure where possible and replace it with the action that's going to occur.
It's funny that you bring that up because my very final bullet, which is generally, when it relates to this, is define and use deliberately and consistently verbs such as promote, encourage, incentivize, support, provide, consider, ensure, etc. they should mean something. And when you see ensure in the policy, you should know what that means.
Or use something different if you can't say exactly.
Whatever word fits with what the policy is, but actually, have a definition for what the different verbs mean and what's expected.
We went through that with the housing team. Laura was all over that as well. And so we kind of, I think what you'll find is you go through these drafts that you'll see that there has been those action words kind of put in there and those things like ensure and.
I could have Carl run back the tape about 2 hours. He could give you a nice, concise definition of ensure.
All right. Oh, guarantee. I have it right here if you want to see how Webster defines it.
If I may jump into 1.1, I wanted to offer something different than not compromised as the affirmative, desired outcome, something like enhanced or maintained. Because not compromised implies that growth and development are inherently negative or carry a cost to other city residents. We don't want that connotation in our controlling land use document.
So you said enhanced or?
Enhanced or maintained. I mean, maintained would kind of be like the worst case scenario is that, you get new neighbors and your quality of life is a status quo. But the idea would be that development should be enhancing, the community.
Oh, there you go. I like that.
1.2, the phrasing feels really off here. Without committing resources to delivering services to non-city residents, can we use positive or affirmative language to ensure the city is compensated for such services?
Yeah.
I skipped ahead to 1.8.
Which one was that?
1.2.
It's about annexation.
Yeah, it's basically saying you're being mean to your neighbors. That comment is very mean to your neighbors.
Number 1.8, lowercase that N in north.
Why?
It's not North Clackamas County, it's Northern Clackamas County.
Oh.
I know that the Parks District and the school district are both, have
Well, why don't you just say Clackamas County and scratch off the north?
I'd be fine with that. 2.2, not combat climate change, but to mitigate the impacts thereof.
We're not fighting it.
I mean, seriously.
Not at all.
2.4, back to the verbs. What is strive? I ask that again later. 2.5, I encourage us to actually set targets to reduce water use. And same with 2.6, let's set targets. 3.6.
So here, I would push back a little bit on the set targets.
2.5 and 3.4 set targets. 3.4 was set targets, sorry.
Oh,
You
was
don't set the
2.5?
targets in the policy, but the policy is that you're going to set targets, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would much rather say promote water conservation than say set targets, because now what you have done is now you have said, okay, well, now we need to set goals that may or may not be reachable or may not be allowed by federal or state standards, or you could just use federal or state standards or whatever. Promoting it still means that you could set up a priority. It just seems like that you're kind of henpenning yourself a little bit.
I think by setting targets for reducing water use, you set yourself up to be able to plan to accommodate projected use better. I mean, I think that, just knowing, having some kind of, tracking something and, I think that it just puts us in a better place for long-range planning to actually, we're going to try to do some things to reduce our water use and to get more.
I'm not going to argue with that, but I think it's a very difficult thing for the city of Milwaukee to actually implement and set up. And so promoting it, maybe if the technology gets there, but if somebody says, oh, well, you haven't set this up yet.
I like the idea
is what I'm saying.
I like having metrics. I like being able to judge how well we're doing against a target.
But that could still be promoting. You could say such as setting metrics at the end of that.
3.6, I wanted to add from plant and system operators. From plant operations, from plant and system operations. Generating energy from plant and system operations. It doesn't just have to be plant operations, it could be the whole system that could be contributing in some way. I've shared technology ideas with staff before about using pipes to generate electricity.
Under goal 3, is it a foregone conclusion that the Kellogg treatment plant will be there for the duration of this
20 years.
comprehensive plan?
Yeah.
So this is, a little bit of a shift in the assumption, that we're kind of operating under is that it will be. The existing comprehensive plan kind of calls for it to go away. And we've had those discussions at the CPAC level. The council has had those discussions. What are some of those assumptions? How does the big Tri-Cities plan factor in to really, do we need this in the long term? And so the way that the policies are written now is the assumption is that it would be there for the 20-year
Is
planning.
that the result of the conversations with the CPAC and council? Is it the interest, it's just not realistic and that it will go away?
We're going to, one of the questions we were thinking about asking at the open house is basically saying this is the current policy, it's to eliminate the treatment plant.
Well,
We're proposing to keep the treatment plant and expand it. There's a lot in there.
I know it's a hard and expensive thing. It's just, it was so nasty down there last weekend. I couldn't even be anywhere near it.
Really?
It was bad, and like gag bad. That all of even at the boat ramp.
Wow.
Even
You were just at the park and it was,
just within a quarter mile of it.
The wind was blowing that way that day.
It was wretch bad all day.
Do you have a sense of why sometimes it's worse than others? Do you know?
Low flows tend to make it stink the way the wind goes. Just it's a biological process. It has ups and downs, bad days and good days.
Okay.
I knew that the policy used to be for it to go away, and now it's all about what are we going to do with it? And I didn't know if that was a foregone conclusion. And
Well, not a foregone conclusion, but one that is a major shift that's being proposed in the plan.
Well, and so I actually had an add to goal number 3, and my statement was work with federal, state, and other municipalities or entities for future planning and growth related to the capacity of wastewater management. So in other words, you're putting in a caveat in there that we're going to work with our entities around us, the people that share that facility, that, hey, you know what, maybe we all need to kind of work together and figure out what to do with our waste management plan, if it is build a new one, connect up to the other line, or whatever. It doesn't say that anywhere in here that, hey, we should consider actually our partners in all of this. So I'll read that again. Work with federal, state, and other municipalities or entities for future planning and growth related to the capacity of wastewater management.
Okay. Now, time check, we're not going over 10 p.m. So my proposal is to get through this, and then we're going to have to provide email on the urban design policies, because we're not going to get there tonight.
that's fine.
We'll just have to do that, because,
Just send those directly to Denny and I as opposed to the whole commission, so you're not essentially having a discussion.
Open up comment.
Well, this is legislative, though.
I guess so,
It doesn't hurt.
we're not going to have another chance to,
No, we really confused on the whole quarter mile, half mile. I don't get it.
are we going to have another
Well,
chance?
you know what? I think David's right. You should send them to us, and we can distribute them back.
Okay.
Yeah.
The bottom, that High density is a
we
quarter
don't
mile
want to
away
have
from a park.
we don't want to have a meeting
What the hell?
online with people commenting back and forth
Does that
about
mean?
wording. So
Right.
send them directly to us, and then we can.
So to answer Chair Travis's question, as of now, our plan was to come back on August 13th, once we've kind of incorporated public comment and to allow you an additional opportunity. Just because of the way that the public outreach with the open house on July 15th, and then the online survey would run probably from about the 12th to the 23rd. It would be a little bit quick to try to do it at that second meeting of July. And I would have to look at the forecaster. More likely than not, you already have 2 big things on there.
I mean, it seems like it would be nice to be able to dig into it. I mean, can we work it in, just that specific section into the
Yeah, I think
July
we were
23rd
trying to avoid July 23rd because it's Elk Rock Estates. I mean, that could be, we just got those materials now. Vera just got those materials. They basically had a deadline of yesterday to submit new materials, and she's reviewing them now, and I'm not really privy to the specifics of that application, but that one could go a while. So.
And I think it could go a long while.
Yeah.
The annexation on the road right-of-way should be really simple.
Did you do it the right way this time?
I think so.
Just asking.
For 4.5, I wanted to add restrict development within drainage ways and buffers to prevent erosion, blah, blah, blah. 4.6, I wanted to replace examine and encourage opportunities to require unless infeasible. We should be trying to, open up creeks that are buried unless it is not feasible to do so.
On all projects, or are we talking about
wherever
city
there's
projects?
a buried creak?
And a development or redevelopment project,
Yeah.
not just going out and finding them?
No,
Okay.
no, we don't need to be weird about it.
Just confirming.
But no, I think
Use of divining rods.
the default position should be to require daylighting of a buried stream unless it's just not feasible to do so based on the proposal.
I had a question for you on goal 4.
Oh, sure.
The development and redevelopment refers to state and federal water quality standards. We also know that Milwaukee currently has adopted the Portland Stormwater Management Manual, but kind of with Milwaukee's own interpretation. And I wonder about having a policy that Milwaukee would adopt a local stormwater management manual with local standards. I think we've got this kind of, we're Portland standard where convenient, but not
Right.
really doing it the way that Portland does it. And so I've talking with some of the folks on city council, I know there's some desire that Milwaukee would have its own stormwater management manual, and I think that could be a reasonable policy, and it would allow us to set standards for new and redevelopment that are, treating the state and federal as a minimum that we have to meet, but something that would be, our local standards might choose to go beyond that or be more context specific. So I'm wondering if
I mean, I think that
the commission as a whole is.
I think with the size of city we are, that, we probably lean on Portland, to provide that for us, but we actually take it seriously and implement the whole thing and not just where convenient.
Well, we do only, there's a difference as far, we don't utilize Portland's for
Water quality.
I think just for treatment.
And the way we define redevelopment is different than how it's defined in the Stormwater Management Manual. So we were kind of trying to fit our policies, our definitions into their policies, and it doesn't work, in my opinion and in some other folks' opinions, and whether there's room to have a policy around. Your comment that the size, that we're too small for our own, but we could copy the Portland standard and make it our own rather than just referring to it, if
That's
that
true.
makes sense. And
Yeah.
Milwaukee should adopt a stormwater management manual. I think that should be a policy. And if we wanted to copy Portland's word for word, that's fine, but it's our own at that point rather than referring to someone else's.
I mean, you can still adopt largely by reference a lot of what's included in another one, but maybe it sounds like wanting to have it all in one place and having better clarity as far as what actually
So
we're
I'll
doing, because
just-
it is a
yeah.
bit of a piecemeal approach as far as where we actually, this happens when cities adopt their own energy codes and things like that, and it's like, well, where does the state code apply and where does...
There are model codes for small municipalities, so we wouldn't start from scratch. We'd start from an existing model code for a mid-sized municipality. So I guess I would request that there is a policy that Milwaukee will adopt a stormwater management manual.
Yeah.
Maybe it's as simple as that.
Adopt a stormwater management.
And we can, work with engineering and public works directors on, what they would like to see or what their thoughts are on that.
Yeah, okay.
Skipping ahead, if I may, to 5.5, require new development to provide on-site space for recycling. I wanted to add enclosed, so on-site enclosed space for recycling. It's not just loose and about, but is actually enclosed. I also wanted to add some policies to 5, including an equity and inclusion strategy for franchises. And franchise agreements should also address and mitigate the impacts of hauling services on the community, such as noise, pollution, traffic, safety for bikes and pedestrians, etc. The trucks are dangerous.
Oh, I saw an accident in Selwood today that blocked my way getting over the bridge, but...
I mean, the trucks are dangerous. And if we can work with the franchisees to implement safe equipment, then I think we should.
With you.
I think we should be striving.
Any heavy construction equipment on a poorly built road without curbs and sidewalks is
But they can have side skirts and things so that if a bike runs into the side that, you don't go under and get crushed by the tires and stuff like that, and there's things that we could do, that are very simple and could be part of the franchisee agreement.
You're really specifying the garbage trucks and the recycling trucks and that kind of thing, or are there others? Because that's really the only ones that we have a lot of influence on, I guess.
I mean, with this franchise agreement, that's where our authority lies. The problem is bigger than that, but this would address what we have some authority over. 6.1, we talk about SEPTA design principles. I really appreciate seeing this in here. And I just wanted to also say that it should apply to transportation facilities like trails and access ways.
And before we get off public facility, I have some Goal 5 stuff too.
Oh, did you want to do your Goal 5 stuff before I really move into 6? I've only got 2 things for 6.
Go ahead.
Just to time check, we have 4 minutes. So.
Right, but we're not doing urban design.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We are not doing urban design.
we're not doing it.
Which is really unfortunate, but 6.5, ensure streets are designed and maintained to allow access for emergency services. I also think that we should have a policy to work with the fire department to try to figure out how we don't over-design streets to be way too big to accommodate these huge fire trucks that are hardly ever there. And in the meantime, when fire trucks aren't there, everybody drives way too fast because the street is way too wide and open. And this is a common thing across the country that municipalities are going through. And I think that we should have a policy to specifically try to tackle this head on.
I like that addition to this, to kind of balance that a little bit, so we're not just caving to every request.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a sneak preview. We're going to go after the TPR later.
Goal 7, I had 7.3, we referred to safe routes to schools in lowercase. And I want to know, is that safe routes to schools uppercase, or is this just safe access to schools? Because safe routes to schools is a program.
The program.
And if you're talking about safe access to schools, then say that rather than use the lowercase version of the program.
Yeah, I think it's generally not the program, it's the concept of
safe access. And then also wanted to require transportation, this is a new policy for Goal 7, require transportation demand management programs for schools and institutional uses. Plans should consider equity, sustainability, livability impacts in addition to the traffic impacts of projected transportation demand based on the site design and surrounding context.
Yeah, I would just take the first part of that sentence.
Yeah, I know, it's a little.
All the rest of that.
And then my last thing here is 9.2. We use, again, lowercase net zero. Is that net zero uppercase, or are we just seeking to be a net producer of energy? And with that, I will disappointedly not add any of my comments about
So
design.
this is under goal number 5, and these would be additions. So encourage city and local organizations to educate residents on recycling and waste material. And then the other one would be set standards or ordinances that reduce waste from sources such as restaurants and retail establishments.
Can you repeat that one?
Set standards or ordinances that reduce waste from sources such as restaurants and retail establishments.
We need a motion to extend for a few minutes.
Okay,
Move to extend.
I'll
for
second.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Let's do it.
Are we all in favor, or do we need to?
Oh, yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. For what it's worth. Okay. Anyone else on the public facilities and services?
And any big ticket questions? We talked a little bit about,
Public.
obviously the treatment plant would be someplace for the public to weigh in on that. Any other topics that you see related to public facilities?
You know, this thing is such a goofy, I mean, you could bring up recycling or garbage or,
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's a pretty simple concept. And I mean, then you could incorporate, you know, bumpers or recycling advocates and education and how garbage is handled.
I mean, I think Goal 7 is also a good topic around safe access to schools and things like that.
Yeah, you know, yeah.
Okay, so we will all provide comments on the draft urban design policies. I mean, if there's any way to work in an update at even the July 9th
It'd be nice.
meeting
Some of the stuff in urban design
dig in.
going to
It's-
require some
I
conversation.
just
It's meaty,
don't
it's
get
a
it. I
really
don't
meaty
get it.
topic.
I need it
Like we're
explained.
telling ourselves we're going to go after things that aren't in our jurisdiction.
We might be able to do it on
Some of it
July 9th. There might be, I mean, I don't think the PD code amendments are difficult, but that doesn't mean there won't be things to talk about.
So if we're going to do it July 9th, can we see a map of a quarter mile away from a park or whatever that means? I don't know what that means. Is it a linear line? Is it a circular line?
It's probably walkable.
For the urban design part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we throw that all in there.
Okay.
Well, we're going to define it
Maybe some
by
visuals.
how close it is to a park, how close it
We've
is.
done a couple of
can do
maps.
that.
We can provide you with some of
We've
that.
done that for the CPAC on
Yeah, I
kind of
figured you did.
It just seems to me that a house a little bit up the hill downtown is now no longer can be considered high residential because you're away from a park.
So-
mean, it's more than a quarter mile to go down to.
Let's still get our comments in, and then we will hopefully have some time to have a discussion as a group on July 9th, potentially, if that works for your schedule, David.
Yeah, no, I think we can do that.
Or Jenny can do it, but let's still plan to get our comments in so that they at least can understand what our questions are and the things we don't get and the hot topics, so. Okay, with that, thank you, David.
Thank you.
For your tireless
Yes.
endeavor. Do we have any planning department other business updates?
Nope.
Okay, and we don't have any commission committee updates, discussion items. We've already kind of talked about the forecast.
Busy.
So I think we're good there. So how about a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
You guys are
Adjourned.
down a minute early. Wow.